Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the District of Squamish regular business meeting for Tuesday, February 15th. Hatsqualin, Queeslukmuk, Latsquamish, Ulkameo. We have the privilege tonight of meeting on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. Council motion to adopt the agenda by Council French, seconded by Council Pettengill. Any opposed? Motion carries. Any notice of motion? Seeing none, we do not have anything under delegations, petitions, or proclamations this evening. Item 5 is consideration of unscheduled public attendance. So this is anyone that feels they have an issue that council needs to hear prior to our next meeting in 2 weeks. Not related to the public hearing, obviously. So it's star 3 or hands up on the participant panel or. Okay, seeing none. We're on to item 6. We have a public hearing this evening, District of Squamish zoning bylaw number 2200-2011, amendment bylaw for stage 3 general amendments number 2824, 2021. I just have to read our opening statement. I just want to acknowledge that Councillor Stoner is joining us electronically. This public hearing is being held pursuant to the Local Government Act requirements to allow the public to present and to provide submissions to council respecting the proposed bylaw. This is District of Squamish zoning bylaw number 2200-2011, amendment bylaw for stage 3 general amendments number 2824, 2021. Everyone present will be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard or provide a written submission. We want to ensure that no one is discouraged or prevented from making their views known, whether speaking in favor or against the proposed zoning amendment. Please ensure that your remarks are relevant to the matters contained in the proposed bylaw. Please note that the public hearing is not an opportunity for members of the public to have their questions answered by staff or by council. It is your opportunity to make submissions. Any questions or points of clarification can be directed to staff by contacting the planning department. Please note that this public hearing is being recorded and web streamed live, and the recording will be posted to the district website. Members of council may ask clarifying questions following presentations, but council is here to listen and will not debate the merits of the proposed bylaw with the public or each other during the public hearing. Up to and as part of this hearing, the public has had the opportunity to make submissions to council. If any submissions were received, they are available for review and comment and have been included as part of staff's report. Any submissions received after the agenda was published have been added to the electronic agenda and to the electronic public hearing package available on the district website. Any submissions made during the hearing can be reviewed during the hearing by viewing the electronic agenda. Submissions will be uploaded by staff as they are received. I'll now ask the planning department to outline what the bylaw is proposing. Over to you, Mr. Daly.
Thank you, Mayor Elliott. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Brian Daly, Development and Subdivision Coordinator with Community Planning. I am here tonight to present the public hearing for the Stage 3 technical amendments of the 2020 zoning bylaw update. At the January 18th, 2022 regular council meeting, Council gave Bylaw 2824 first and second reading and scheduled a public hearing. Council had requested that additional rationale for allowing balconies to project into required setbacks be presented prior to the public hearing. Stage 3 of the zoning bylaw update is intended to address a broader range of issues under the categories of increasing zoning bylaw flexibility, improving functionality, and addressing gaps. Staff have been identifying and tracking issues in the current zoning bylaw over a number of years, and this has informed the general amendments in Stage 3. The Stage 3 amendments include roughly 100 technical amendments, and the amendments can be generally categorized into the following topics. Increasing flexibility. A number of general regulations have been amended to increase flexibility in the zoning bylaw. Staff have identified a number of sections that frequently lead to variance requests. Examples include exempting wild-safe waste enclosures from setback requirements if the lot does not abut a lane. Staff want to incentivize developments providing a central wild-safe waste enclosure as opposed to individual totes. However, these can often lead to variance requests as accessory buildings cannot be located in a front yard. Other examples include reducing the rear yard setback in some RM zones from 9.15 meters to 6 meters and allowing balconies to project up to 0.76 meters into a setback. Improving functionality. Definitions have been added or modified to make parts of the zoning bylaw more clear. Conflicting, obsolete, or confusing sections of the bylaw have been deleted or modified to improve clarity. As an example, patios, decks, balconies, and porches were not previously defined, but were allowed to project into required setbacks. This could lead to confusion for staff and designers about the types of structures that are eligible to project into required setbacks. And finally, addressing gaps. Gaps in the zoning bylaw that were identified by staff have been addressed in this amendment. Examples include prohibiting commercial water bottling as a use in all zones, requiring shared indoor amenity space in apartment developments to be provided in a single location, and adding an interior side setback of 1.52 meters for properties in some RS zones that have a lot width of 10.06 meters or narrower. Attachment 2 to the staff report has a complete list of the proposed amendments. Staff have included an allowance for balconies to project up to 0.76 meters or 2.5 feet as part of the Stage 3 amendments. Council expressed some concern regarding this amendment, noting that it may have an impact on privacy for neighbors and requested more detail regarding best practices for balcony projections. Staff note that relaxation to setbacks for balconies are a common practice in BC. The table on the slide shows allowable balcony projections in other municipalities across BC. The projection allowance recognizes that balconies have a lesser impact associated with massing than the rest of the principal structure and provide incentive for creation of private outdoor space. The 0.76 meter setback allowable projection for balconies is intended to provide for more usable outdoor space for units. As noted in the table above, 0.6 meters appears to be the most common setback exemption for balconies, with Burnaby, Vancouver, and the District of North Vancouver allowing a projection of over 1 meter. The most common variance requests associated with balcony projections are for multiple unit residential projects, apartments, and townhomes. The required interior side setback for zones RM1, 2, and 3 is 4.57 meters. If a project took advantage of the balcony projection, there would still be a 3.81 or 12.5 foot setback between the balcony and the property line. As more stringent energy efficiency requirements are implemented through the BC Energy Step Code, required wall assemblies in buildings are becoming thicker. Given the loss of interior floor area due to the thicker exterior walls, it is more likely that buildings will be built right up to the allowable setback. Staff believe that allowing for a 0.76 meter projection into a required setback for balconies will provide a more usable outdoor space for the future owners of a dwelling unit, and that it is an appropriate amendment. The Stage 3 amendments are also proposing to add an interior side setback of 1.52 meters or 5 feet for lots that are 10.06 meters or 33 feet in width or narrower in the RS1, RS1A, and RS2 zones. The current 2.13 meter or 7 foot setback in these zones would result in 42% of the width of the lot being reserved for interior side setbacks, as opposed to a standard RS1 or 2 lot with a 18.36 meter lot width. That would result in 23% of the width of the lot being reserved for setbacks. There are a limited number of these narrow lots in the district. The majority are found in the Hospital Hill neighborhood. The Stage 3 amendments are also proposing to reduce the rear yard setback in RM1, 2, and 3 from 9.15 meters to 6 meters. Staff are not proposing to change the rear setback in RM4 and RM5, as RM4 is associated with a specific development, and the properties zoned RM5 are expected to go through a neighborhood planning and rezoning process. The RM zones are the only residential zones that have a 9.15 meter rear yard setback. Zones that allow for single-family homes, as well as duplexes and triplexes, have a rear yard setback of 7.62 meters, and zones that allow for townhomes and apartments vary from 7.62 meters down to 3.6 meters. Two recent developments, Waterfront Landing and Oceanfront, have rear yard setbacks of 3.6 meters and 5 meters respectively. 9.15 meter setbacks are reserved for rural, agricultural, and commercial zones. A review of rear yard setbacks in multiple unit zones and other municipalities revealed a range of setbacks, with the most common being 7.5 meters. The following slide shows a very simplified illustration of the potential impacts of a building shading on a neighboring property. Slide shows a 10.68 meter tall building setback 9.15 meters from a property line. The neighboring building is setback 7.62 meters from the shared property line. The slide shows the potential shade at 12 p.m. on March 21st. The slide shows the shade on the neighboring property with a reduced rear setback of 6 meters. The neighboring yard is impacted by the shade, but not the adjacent building. Slide shows the shade impact on an adjacent building with a 9.15 meter setback at 12 p.m. on December 21st. The first 2 stories of the adjacent building are shaded. And this slide shows the shade impact with a 6 meter setback. There's a vertical difference of 0.83 meters on the adjacent building, which provides a minimal impact on the 3rd story of the building. The 1st and 2nd story were also fully shaded with a 9.15 meter setback. The majority of properties that are zoned for multiple unit residential use that have yet to be developed with multifamily housing are located in the Wilson Crescent neighborhood. Remaining properties in the district with multiple unit residential zoning are already developed with multifamily buildings and are unlikely to be redeveloped in the immediate future. A desktop review of a number of existing multifamily developments around town also show a rear yard setback of less than 9.15 meters. The reduced rear setback will allow for increased design flexibility in the future if and when properties redevelop. Given the review of other multifamily setbacks within the district and across other municipalities in BC, staff are recommending reducing the rear setback in RM1, 2, and 3 to 6 meters. Project page for the Stage 3 general amendments was posted on the district's website. 2 open house events were held in mid-September, 1 in person and 1 online. Invitations were emailed to the development community and other professionals who work regularly with the zoning bylaw, such as architects and designers, and the events were advertised to the general public in the Squamish Chief newspaper. 10 people attended the in-person open house and 2 people attended the online open house. Attendees were generally supportive of the proposed general amendments. Notice of the public hearing was advertised in the February 3rd and 10th editions of the Squamish Chief newspaper. 27 public comments were received prior to the public hearing, including a petition against the proposed amendments. The majority of the comments were not supportive of the amendments related to reducing the rear setback in the RM zones and including a decreased setback for narrow lots in RS1, RS1A, and RS2. 6 letters of support were received for the proposed amendments, and the remaining letters opposed the amendments related to the setback changes. Given public's concern related to the reduced setback in RM zones and the addition of a decreased interior setback for narrow lots in the RS zones, staff would like to highlight that council has the ability to amend a bylaw at 3rd reading following a public hearing, provided that it does not alter the use or increase the density. Deleting the sections of the bylaw related to these setbacks would not constitute amending use or density. So staff recommend that following the public hearing, council give bylaw 2824 3rd reading. And alternatively, if council is not comfortable with the proposed setback amendments in the RS and RM zones, staff recommend that following the public hearing, bylaw 2824 be given an amended 3rd reading to delete the relevant sections of the bylaw associated with those amendments. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. So just so the public can prepare, I'll read the public instructions and I'll come to council for questions. Details to participate via telephone or on WebEx are displayed on the screen or will be shortly for those who have logged in from your computer or are watching the live stream of the meeting. Instructions are also included on the district website. In order to get on the speakers list, if you are on the telephone, please raise your hand, so to speak, by dialing *3. Or if you're on WebEx, on computer or cell phone, please open the participant panel and click on the hand icon. Thank you. Please note that there will be a moderator who will communicate with speakers. When it is your turn to speak, you will receive a voice prompt on your telephone or a dialog box on WebEx. Please remember to put your hand down after you finish speaking. And so you just have to dial *3 again on the phone or click the hand icon again on WebEx. In-person participation is available for those unable to participate by electronic means at Municipal Hall in council chambers. Staff is available to add the names of interested parties to the speakers list and to provide direction when it is your turn to speak. Please commence your remarks by clearly stating your name and neighborhood. Please note that speakers will be given up to 5 minutes to address council in order that everyone has an opportunity to speak. If you've already spoken and then wish to speak again to provide more or new comments, please raise your hand again or add your name to the speakers list once I have indicated that speakers will be offered additional speaking opportunities. So with that, I'm going to go to council first to see if they have any clarifying questions, and then I will open the floor to the public. Councilor Hertford.
Thank you. I think I was curious about thank you for the description of the balcony projections, and I think I'm getting it. But one of the things that was missing, and I'm hoping you can shed some light on for me, was the relative setbacks of those other jurisdictions, because I think that is important into how much we allow the balcony to project into it. If it's a very generous side setback, then perhaps those 2-meter regulations that I saw on your tables are appropriate. And I'm just curious the relationship between those two things, if you follow me.
Through the mayor, so generally they're quite similar setbacks to the districts. They obviously vary. The balcony projections are intended to be allowed across the residential zones. So obviously there's quite a range of various zones that you could be applied to, but generally 4.52 meters, I believe, was the multiple unit residential setback, interior setback in the residential zone, and that was quite common amongst other municipalities. And then it's similar for single unit and 2-unit residential zones.
Thank you. And then to the different setbacks for the narrower lots in the zone. I found your slide very helpful. We looked at that neighborhood. Was that the slide that you showed? Was that a Hospital Hill? That was that neighborhood?
That's correct.
So how different is what's proposed to for this regulation to what's there current in that zone currently as far as structures go? Because they look pretty tight there, and yeah.
Through the mayor, it's quite similar to what's currently built there. It's hard to get an accurate number on the GIS mapping because the property lines are a bit off. The buildings appear to be crossing the property lines, but there's a limited number of the 33-foot wide lots. That amendment was highlighted by the building inspectors as a potential gap in the zoning bylaw for the limited number of lots that do exist that are 33-foot wide in town.
If I can just add to what Brian said, the properties in Hospital Hill, those narrow lots, a number of them have had to go through either the development variance or the board of variance process to reduce the setbacks to make those buildings fit, essentially.
Thank you. But the older buildings that are sort of, I hesitate to call anyone's home a historic piece, but the buildings that were built there sort of when that development went up, these setbacks appear to me to be remarkably similar to that, because I'm not seeing, I think your number was 40% of the lots consumed with setbacks. So is that would you agree with my assessment? Sorry to put you in that spot.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. And one more piece. The slides you showed with the to illustrate the side or the rear setbacks with shade and so on were helpful, but I'm having a hard time, and I think I'm going to foreshadow, I think we might hear about this coming up as well, when that rear setback butts up against a side setback, and we're not dealing with two properties that have the same back-to-back rear setbacks. I wondered why, is it common to not have a different setback in that situation, similar to when we apply these regulations to a narrow lot, we're going to do it this way, and in the setback context. And I'm just curious, as we sort of look at how these properties, there's an endless number of ways the properties can interact with each other in the setbacks. And I just curious on staff's opinion on how that sort of is accounted for when you lay something like this out over the entirety of the area.
Through the mayor, obviously it's challenging to capture every possible scenario. There are certain parts of town, specifically the Wilson Crescent neighborhood, where there is a crescent street going around, so it's resulting in a rear yard coming or butting up against an interior side yard, as you've explained. That's a pretty rare situation. Typically, lots share a rear lot line. It's uncommon that they would be adjacent to an interior side setback, but obviously that is the case in some parts of town. And staff were trying to come up with a reasonable setback reduction that could be applied generally across town.
Thank you. I guess my last follow-up, thank you. You've been, I know, on this is it common, for me, the width piece is the shorter setbacks and the narrow lots really contemplates that lot itself. So is it common in these zones and those setbacks to consider what it's directly adjacent to, or does the regulation need to speak to what's inside the bounds of the property? I'm just curious about that interaction because I haven't worked with that piece.
Through the mayor, they typically consider on each parcel and not what's on an adjacent parcel. The only time that would be is on some kind of regulations related to use, where you want to buffer a use from some kind of other use that is not considered appropriate to be close to. But siting of buildings is always looking at the specific property that it's related to.
Other questions? Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, through the chair. A few questions around the rear setback proposal. So in the completed items list, Mr. Daly, the proposed solution for the RM zones was to reduce the setback from 9.15 meters to 7.62 meters. And then we decided to go with the 6 meters. And so I'm just curious why staff made that leap from the 7.62 to the 6 meters.
Through the mayor, staff were trying to, one of the goals of this project is to increase flexibility through the zoning bylaw. And so staff thought it was appropriate to reduce the setback to 6 meters, given a review of other jurisdictions. And many of them had a 7.62 meter setback. However, a number of them did have a 6 meter setback, as well as other zones within the district that allow for townhouses had a reduced setback or a setback of 6 meters or less. A number of existing multifamily developments around town have a rear setback of less than 6 meters. So staff are really trying to increase the flexibility through this zoning bylaw update. That's one of the overarching goals. So staff went with a further reduced setback to try and achieve that.
Thank you. And then I guess just follow up on that point. Did we consider reducing, like making a smaller reduction in the rear setback and perhaps a small reduction on the side setbacks, like being a little bit more creative in terms of not just reducing the rear setback, but I think part of the rationale for this is because we know that in particular, increasing energy efficiency in buildings requires a larger footprint and some other flexibility issues. So I'm just curious if we thought about some of those alternative forms in terms of being a little bit more give and take across the various setbacks that we have.
Through the mayor, no, staff were just looking specifically at the rear setback, given that it was so much higher than the setbacks in any of the other residential zones.
Okay, and then I have one more question. This came out from a few weeks ago when we were contemplating a variance to a setback, and staff said that the request for the variance enabled us to open a negotiation with the developer to secure a critical amenity around sidewalks in that particular area. And so I'm just curious, if we move on this, then do we completely erase our ability to have those negotiations and actually secure some of those critical amenities that we've identified in those neighborhoods.
I can take
Mr. Valniscus?
Thank you. That's a great question. It does somewhat reduce our ability to negotiate. However, I think ideally what we need is a zoning and a community amenity contribution regime that works together, rather than negotiating, on a case-by-case basis through this variance process. And I would say most proposals that have variances often have more than one, so because it is so tricky to fit, a unique property, a unique development into that fits in the zoning bylaw. So we often see multiple variances. I would expect that with reduction in one setback, that doesn't mean that we won't be negotiating anymore, although the chances of somebody meeting zoning are higher. But I think the ultimate goal is having a zoning regime that works hand in hand with the community amenity contribution, so we can capture those required amenities in each neighborhood without variances.
All right, I have one other question around the projection of balconies. Mr. Daly, you mentioned in your presentation that most of the variances on the topic of balconies and projections are coming from multi-unit applications or proposals. And so I'm just curious why we are proposing to apply the allowable projection across all zones and not just the multifamily zones.
Through the mayor, the intention is, again, the goal is increasing zoning bylaw flexibility in these amendments, and given that it is less likely that on a single unit or 2-unit dwelling that there would be a balcony projecting into an interior side setback, because those setbacks are much smaller and they have generous front and rear yard setbacks. They would most typically have a balcony facing the front or rear yard. Staff just wanted to allow that flexibility through all housing forms to increase the options for people to provide private usable outdoor space.
Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah, thanks. Just wondering, you mentioned that we looked to other communities to gauge what different setbacks are. I'm curious, though, if we know where their setbacks came from. Were these things that were sort of arbitrary at some point in time and then communities debated and they just sort of evolved? Or was there some sort of more objective reason of why this versus that setback at various points in time?
Through the mayor, I was not able to establish the rationale for each of the various setbacks in the various communities. I was simply reviewing what is proposed or what is the regulation in various municipalities across BC.
Any other questions, council? All right, seeing none, I do have a speakers list, so I'm going to just ask the moderator if there's any hands up online.
Yes, Mayor Elliott, we have one hand up online.
So I'm going to go through the speakers list. I have 5 people on my list here at Municipal Hall, and then I'll come to the person that's online. And again, it's *3 on your telephone, or open the participant panel and click on the hand icon to raise your hand. The first person is Irene Yu. Please leave your mask on until you get to the podium, then you can take it off. You don't need to touch the microphone or anything. And start with your name and neighborhood, please.
Great, thank you. My name is Irene Yu. I'm in the Wilson Crescent neighborhood. And good evening, councillors for the District of Squamish. Thanks for hearing me out here. I'm here to express my opposition to the proposed bylaw amendments with regards to the rear setbacks being reduced from 9.15 meters to 6 meters. And also the section that would allow projection of balconies up to 0.76 in that reduced setback. I want to clarify that we're generally in agreement that Squamish requires densification and higher environmental building standards, and concur that in the context of a growing population that new housing must be built for ownership, rental stock, and of course, social housing. But the question at the heart of my opposition to this bylaw change is the widespread change to the increase in density by decreasing the space between buildings. While we should increase density, must it mean that it is to be done at the expense of one's sense of space with your neighbor? Isn't the reason that one relocates to beautiful Squamish is to get more space, closer proximity to trees, mountains, river, and sea, to see more sky and less buildings? If we weren't born and raised here, then likely we've come to grow families and children or to put down roots and grow older here, in a place that offers space, community, and proximity to natural elements such as sun, air, trees, views, and accessibility to recreational areas in nature. I don't suggest or wish that our zoning bylaws should become so restrictive for development that we stagnate development. Take, for example, West Vancouver. However, I also do not desire that densification should happen without regard for what we would become: crowded, possibly traffic-filled, parking lot dominated, suburban bedroom community characterized by dense housing and lack of local services to residents. Just because other districts have smaller rear setbacks, why would we want to be just like every other district? We need to be thoughtfully engaged and have better communication about what densification will really look like. And we need better communication about when and where it is planned to occur. Which brings me to my next point. I understand that the bylaw changes are to help improve clarity, increase flexibility, and address gaps with the proposed bylaw changes. I have a great concern that the district has not adequately informed impacted homeowners and communities, nor engaged in a robust enough public engagement campaign. It appears the changes in the bylaw take the point of view of city planning and city planners, development and developers, rather than residents, homeowners, taxpayers, your electors, and constituents. The District of Squamish's official community plan, or OCP, your overall guiding statement of objectives and policies for decision on planning and land use management under Goal 5 says engaged. And the first point states, residents and affected stakeholders have meaningful opportunities to engage in community decision-making. It goes further to summarize this as support early and ongoing community engagement in municipal decision-making. Consider all stakeholders affected by and interested in decisions and provide timely and accessible information to support meaningful participation. I posit that this bylaw amendment has not adequately considered current and existing stakeholders in this rear and side setback bylaw change. There has not been early and ongoing community engagement, as it took a group of residents looking at a variance request of one developer for one development to pick up and realize that a wider bylaw change is being considered here. And there has not been timely and transparent access to support meaningful participation from your constituents. Our group has, by pure luck, individuals with enough expertise, willingness, and time to research and look into this bylaw change and bring it to our community's attention in ways that we are able to digest and understand its possible impacts. This was not engagement that council or district staff initiated. Why? Because the point of view of your constituents wasn't really taken. In terms of flexibility, the only perspective from which reducing setbacks increases flexibility is from someone proposing a development or of a specific lot or city planners whose main goal is densification.
30 seconds.
But where's the perspective of existing property owners whose point of view certainly includes their right to enjoyment of their own properties and who want development that enhances their neighborhood and therefore increases everyone's enjoyment of their properties? Larger setbacks will decrease, smaller setbacks will decrease the flexibility that you have in terms of being able to negotiate those community amenity contributions that are so valuable to you until you have overall changes to your bylaw.
Please wrap
And-
up your comments.
I'm sorry?
You're at 5 minutes. I need you to wrap up your comments, please.
Okay. So while it's desirable to address gaps in zoning bylaw, changes to reduce existing rear and side setbacks is not a zoning bylaw gap that needs to be addressed, but rather it is a desirable tool to keep buildings a reasonable distance from one another in future developments. This tool helps to preserve light and preserve privacy such that neighbors and buildings adjacent to one another have enjoyment of their properties. In closing, there is no need to revise the setbacks to achieve planning and council goals of improving clarity, flexibility, and addressing gaps. This bylaw amendment is not taking into consideration the point of view of your constituents as they are now in the present moment. I strongly recommend that you sever the bylaw amendments regarding rear and side setbacks and preserve the current rear and side setbacks as they are. Variances can then be considered on a case-by-case basis. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your submission. Next up, I have Maddie Walton. Please start your comments with your name and neighborhood, and just leave your mask on until you get to the podium. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and councillors. My name is Maddie Walton and I live in the Wilson Crescent neighbourhood. I'm only addressing the reduction of setbacks in the proposed bylaw, and I oppose any reduction of setbacks, balconies or otherwise. The District of Squamish did not communicate this proposed bylaw to the people of Squamish. It was up to a handful of residents to inform the community of the district's proposed bylaw change. This lacks transparency because it was not widely disseminated, and this process is akin to maybe autocratic governance. By this, I mean that the district, by not following best practice to inform the people, is acting without the people knowing what the district is doing and how it affects the people. If a developer wants a variance to a building setback, I get a notice mailed to me and delivered to my door if it backs onto my property. This bylaw change will affect how I enjoy my property. Why should I and all affected residents not get written notification from the District of Squamish about this bylaw amendment? Why is it left up to residents to form a petition, form Facebook groups, and walk around the neighbourhoods after spending our own money to inform the people of Squamish about a bylaw amendment? This is not right. There should be no mysteries, secrets, or surprises. If the district considers that only using the District of Squamish website, and I understand some print media, to disseminate information to the public is the best practice, then I provide evidence that the majority of your constituents did not know what you were doing with this bylaw. By the way, I commend 4 of the councillors here tonight for engaging with myself and my fellow neighbours over this past weekend, both in person and on the phone. Who is the District of Squamish and the Mayor and the Council responsible to? The people of Squamish. Zoning is used to shape the places where we live, work and play to ensure the development of a community is in the best interests of its citizens. Goal 5 of the district's official community plan is engaged, which means the community is passionate and engaged in community and civic life. It means residents of all ages understand and actively participate in local decision making. It means the district values, demonstrates and shows leadership in open, transparent, accessible and forward-thinking governance. The district has not met this goal of information sharing. One of the district's policies under the OCP is to consider all stakeholders affected by and interested in decisions and provide timely and accessible information necessary for their meaningful participation. All engagement around the bylaw changes has been with industry representatives, and none has been with residents who would be impacted by the changes or the public more broadly. The district's role in preserving values of light, space and privacy throughout the neighbourhood becomes essential through careful zoning, adequate setbacks and thoughtful design, not the cookie-cutter approach that the District of Squamish intends via this bylaw amendment. I want to emphasise this point. The incentive for developers to maximise light, privacy and space for the entire neighbourhood is missing. There is no incentive for developers to care or plan with existing residents in mind. And I'm quoting members of the council when I say this, and I agree. We do have the right to enjoy our property. Clearly, the people of Squamish value privacy, sun, space, and a transparent and better collaborative approach with government. You have the petition, which I emailed this morning. There's now 331 that have signed the petition against amending the setbacks. One point, most people don't like to speak and stand up here or write in. The petition may be a good guide.
30 seconds, Mr. Walton.
The petition may be a good guide to the community's position on this matter. Thanks very much.
Thank you for your submission this evening. Next up, I have Jamie Martin. You can leave your mask on until you reach the podium. Please don't touch the microphone. Start with your name and neighborhood.
Yes, Mayor, Council, Jamie Martin, number 2, 1038 Finch Drive. Yeah, I'm happy to hear some of these bylaws are coming forward. I've been designing homes in the corridor for over 35 years, so I'm well aware of some of these bylaws I'd like to see come forward, mainly in the single family or coach homes. So number 1 is the stairs and side yards for coach homes. You have a 7-foot setback, and having the stairs, into the setbacks up to these areas is a good thing. Gives them more options, especially when you're up tight against a rear yard, side yard, and you're trying to place this coach house in that particular spot. So one thing that may transpire doing that is when the stairs are up against a neighbor, there's a privacy issue. I personally did that with my home. I have some stairs up against a neighbor. I ended up putting an extra screening, frosted glass screening on top of my railing so that the neighbors had their privacy and there would be no complaints. So the other thing is the overhangs is what I'm really which is being proposed. I've always, I've been hinting for overhang changes for years. And it's nice to see that they're finally coming. 3'6", 3 feet is apparently what's proposed. I wish it was 3'6" or 4 feet. Overhangs are actually a safety issue. The more overhang you have, the better protection you have around your house, the better protection over the stairs that are going up to this coach house or anywhere else. Also protects your buildings around. Every foot you add to your house, you're adding 10 or 15 years of life to your house. You're pulling off less paint materials to maintenance your house. So this is a good thing to have these roof overhangs change. So given all that, like I say, I wish it were 4 feet. I understand that these bylaws are all roped into one thing. So if I don't know if you can extrapolate some of these bylaws out to pass them, or is it all going to be one big bylaw change? I guess that's an answer for the planning department to answer me on that one. So if this doesn't pass, then I guess the roof overhangs don't pass, and I guess the stairs don't pass. I have some coach houses right now that are, if they don't pass, will be going to variance, which is what you're trying to avoid. So that's for the single family. Just a comment on the setbacks for the multifamily. Since you're increasing them closer to the rear yards, Squamish is very unique and 360-degree view corridors everywhere. And it's kind of, when you're going up 6 stories, you're taking away these view corridors. If you're going to go to the rear yards up to that area, why not be going up 2 stories and start to pyramid back? And give the neighbors a bit of a break as well, but also you're increasing the view corridors. I did sit on a committee 20 years ago with a group of architects, landscape architects, realtors, and we looked at the shape of Squamish it was going to take downtown. And we talked about doing this, but I don't know what happened. It's not being exercised today, so it's going straight up. So anyway, that would be my opinion is if you're going to do these, increase these or decrease the setbacks, at least try and pyramid them a bit. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Next up, I think it's Stephanie Hewson. Yep. So just begin your remarks with your name and neighborhood, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Stephanie Hewson. I live in Wilson Crescent. And I wanted to talk tonight about the changes to the setbacks, specifically the rear setbacks in the zones RM 1, 2, and 3. And I'd like to echo a comment that's already been made about my support for the important work that needs to be done around densification. I also want all of the same benefits that that will bring to the communities. And I understand the hope that's bound up in densification in how it will help us face some of the major challenges that we have before us, like climate change and affordable housing and protecting the environment from urban sprawl. But I feel more complicated about these changes that are being proposed tonight. I think for me, density at its core is not density for its own sake, but it's about improving quality of life for everyone. And if it's not doing that, then it has to be done better. The first way I think it needs to be done better is that it requires open communication and public process. And I won't speculate on the reasons why that didn't happen in this case. I really don't know, and I don't know if it matters. But I think we should hold our government to a higher standard than that, even if the conversations are difficult. Secondly, in terms of quality of life, as council knows, I live in a kind of weirdly oriented lot. And when I looked at the numbers for the bylaw changes and what that would mean for our building and the buildings that were eventually built, what I saw is it would create a kind of a tunnel. The district says that the setbacks are generous, and maybe that's the case in the case of a standard lot. But in our lot, I would say they're not generous, and that the numbers are in the tables comparing to other areas in the district don't show the full picture. We tried to outline this in our written submission. I hope council had a chance to see that. There may be other lots like ours, I imagine, in Wilson Crescent and perhaps elsewhere in the district, and we might not know about them because there hasn't really been that much outreach about this change. I think that could result in some inequitable situations. I don't know the best way to address this. It might be to not change the rear setback in these zones and adjust on a case-by-case basis. It might be to create a special exception in the bylaw in these sorts of circumstances. But either way, retrofitting a neighborhood for greater development is different than subdividing a large area of land, and it may take more careful planning, and it should be treated that way. The last thing I want to address is, I think, more a theme of the binary that I've seen in some of the conversations around densification between humans and nature. And I think often, understandably, one of the goals of densification is to reduce our spread into the natural environment. But it ends up being like we're talking about humans here and nature's here. And that's really not, I mean, the truth of it is that humans need nature, and we don't just need it around the areas we live in, but we need it where we live our everyday lives, on our streets and in our homes. What I mean by nature is pretty simple. It's green space, trees, and I would include natural light in that definition. If we start to think about nature as part of our urban infrastructure, I think we'll get a lot further than thinking about it as separate. And if we try to solve sprawl by creating really dense neighborhoods that don't take nature into account, I think what we're going to end up with is kind of sterile rows of townhomes where there's not enough light and space for things to grow. That, in my opinion, doesn't solve the problem. It creates two problems. So thank you for hearing my comments tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Hewson. Next up, I think it's Johan Esterle. Just begin by your name and address, and you have 5 minutes to address council.
Thank you. Good evening, council. So my name is Johannes Esterle. I live in the Wilson Crescent neighborhood, and I'm here to express my opposition to the reduction in the rear setbacks proposed for RM1, RM2, and RM3 zone areas. And as you know, Wilson Crescent is mostly zone RM1. The proposed bylaw will reduce the current setbacks between new built buildings in these zones from 9.15 meters to 6 meters. I live on a development that has been built on a rectangular lot oriented east to west, adjacent to lots soon to be developed and oriented north to south. This means our development site setback is adjacent to the other lot's rear setback. This is mostly because the Wilson Crescent neighborhood has not a square shape and is being redeveloped lot by lot in comparison to a master plan community, like Sea and Sky or Newport Landing in the same area. In a master plan community, lots are designed to be parallel to one another to maximize the use of space and privacy. In a lot by lot redevelopment, as what we're seeing in the Wilson Crescent neighborhood, the current larger rear setbacks make sense to account for privacy between new buildings on lots that are weirdly positioned or on lots perpendicular to one another. I would also like to share another point to support the rationale for the current setbacks by referring to the Wilson Crescent microplan developed by the District of Squamish in 2018. Reducing the rear setbacks in RM1 zone area in the Wilson Crescent neighborhood is going against the vision of the microplan, as it won't retain the scale of the neighborhood and will increase building massing. I would also like to quote the development permit guideline fit with existing neighborhood from the Wilson Crescent microplan and the OCP. On section H, the section H states that open space within new development should be situated in areas that is adjacent to public right-of-way and or adjacent properties to allow for opportunity to share open spaces within the community. Reducing the rear setbacks will go against this guideline. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is the end of my speakers list here. So how many folks do they have their hand up online?
One person has a hand up, Mayor Elliott. Robert Forsyth, you are our next speaker. Please state your name and neighborhood for the record, and you have up to 5 minutes to address council. You can go ahead now, please. Robert, are you there?
Do you need to unmute, Mr. Forsyth?
We have no other speakers, then we'll come back to Mr. Forsyth in a moment.
Thank you. Is there anyone attending at City Hall that wishes to speak? If so, just raise your hand. Come forward. Start with your name and neighborhood, and you have 5 minutes to address council.
My name is Heather Chilak, and I live in Wilson Crescent, the famous Wilson Crescent. Good evening, councillors, mayor, councillors. As a resident of Squamish, I would like to express my opposition regarding the proposed amendments that would reduce rear setbacks in zones RM1, 2, and 3, as well as the amendment that would allow the projection of balconies into the rear setback, or up to 0.76 meters into the setback. In attempting to take a holistic perspective and considering references to other rapidly growing communities and cities facing densification and infill, it's really hard not to think, but Squamish is special. And I found myself thinking that. Or Squamish is different, or fall into this whole NIMBY thing, because that's kind of the position I put myself in, thinking, like, is this a whole situation of I don't want this in my backyard, but I don't care about other communities? But actually, I think it goes without saying that anyone that lives in Squamish recognizes that we live in an extremely unique place, which is why topics like densification and infill are such passionate ones. It's because we want to have a voice in what the future looks like for all those things that make us special at the neighborhood and at the community level. As Councillor Anderson said in the public hearing on February 1st, when supporting the motion to refer the recent proposed Wilson Crescent development back to staff, there are a number of issues that need to be addressed. And we do have to consider what we're doing community-wide. We have to make multifamily developments work as a viable alternative, if you like, but we need to do this right, and we have some lessons and puzzles to solve. Indeed, there are some lessons and puzzles to solve. And to that point, a blanket amendment to reduce rear setbacks does not address some of those puzzles in a thoughtful and sensitive way. Looking at our environment here in Squamish, it's no surprise that the demand for housing continues to increase. As a rapidly growing community, we must recognize that densification is a complex and nonlinear process which must be addressed at various scales and across time, and with neighborhood engagement and transparency at its core. Foundational to this is the trust and transparency we expect from our elected officials to appropriately engage the public when key decisions are made. Our built environment has great potential to shape our experiences and social interactions, as well as to mitigate social isolation by promoting trust and sociability. With thoughtful and transparent neighborhood engagement and planning, it is possible to manage growth while preserving the natural surroundings we love and the neighborhoods that we live in and the values of the community. Concerningly, without proper planning and community consultation, we run the risk of being packed and cramped sardine-like into compressed neighborhoods where issues like privacy, natural light, loss of mature trees are the trade-offs. This does not mean that the district shouldn't pursue densification. The goals of the OCP is a step in the right direction. However, it's important to take seriously the impacts of densification and address them through thoughtful law and policy which minimizes these impacts. And again, to my earlier point, with the consultation of and the consideration of current neighborhoods and communities. This is how the OCP would become more than an interesting document, and it was very interesting when I was reading it over the weekend, housed on a public website and referenced to support the interest of public officials. Indeed, there was a lot of theoretical discussion about densification and infill on the website. I really enjoyed listening to all the open houses in May and over the course of the summer. But when it came to actually taking the time to transparently table the proposed amendments, the district buried it within over 100 technical amendments. This does not feel very courageous to me, and this is another value of the community, courage. In addition, it goes against supporting early and ongoing community engagement and counters the OCP goal. It did not consider all stakeholders affected by and interested in the decisions being timely and accessible. The decisions and provide timely, accessible information to support meaningful participation. And reflecting on the values of working together and doing the right thing and thinking beyond today, I feel that the consultation around this very significant amendment has been severely lacking. Given the DOC values, I find it confusing that when a variance to a setback on a single lot is proposed, as with our Wilson Crescent meetings over the last couple of months.
30 seconds, please.
That consultation was required. But when it comes to a broad change that impacts the entire community, then obviously there wasn't a public consultation, but obviously there's kind of a moral obligation around that. So that's why I'm frustrated, disappointed, and confused as to why this proposed amendment, there was no legal notification on the impacted residents when a setback is changing. So for those reasons, I request that the council introduce a motion removing all amendments related to setback and density to another process when they can be studied in a more focused and holistic manner with the attention to the unique context of the affected neighborhoods and a more robust public engagement process. Thank you very much.
Thank you for submission. I'll go back to our moderator.
Robert, we're going to try to get you on again. If you could state your name and neighborhood for the record, and you have 5 minutes to address council. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Robert Forsyth from Brackendale. Are you able to hear me?
We
Can
are.
you hear me? Oh, perfect. There's frogs in the background here like crazy. So I guess basically I have 4 points. I was at the last council meeting when we addressed the Wilson Crescent development, and I believe it was Councillor Race that brought up the true 2 things that matter in regards to the setbacks and the bylaws that are proposed with the setbacks that are pretty much blanketed wide and open the door for developers to eventually expand their developments, increase their square footage. So there's one point there is that I haven't seen the financial impact that the existing neighborhoods would have. I haven't seen any of those type of reports in this proposed change, and I'm assuming that there would be a financial loss of some sort with these developments being able to push towards the existing neighborhoods. There would be a financial impact on those neighborhoods. And then I also haven't seen anything to do, and this is what Councillor Race brought up, which kind of really impressed me with his due diligence of being professional, was the fact of the health and the health impact. These setbacks were established for a specific quality of life and a specific type of lifestyle, and that's sort of, that's kind of why they were established. No, not to say that densification isn't something that we should be considering in all areas, or in some areas perhaps, but that again is, and I think some of the speakers have really been keen on speaking, that there just hasn't been any public engagement. I remember back in the days, I know a lot of you councillors and our mayor are kind of, potentially new to Squamish, but we used to have lots of public engagement roundtable meetings where we do brainstorming sessions on different things that impacted our community. When we were doing the Brennan Park, we used to do that all the time. We talked about the gymnasiums that we were going to build there. And we've always spent a lot of good effort previously to this COVID time there's always been an attempt, even during this COVID time, for our counselors and staff to communicate with us, but really we've been sort of left out of the loop. And this is what I go, what just threw on my table on the desk there the other day was, can you please look at this 500-page bylaw adjustments that are being proposed? And I'm like, really? That's a lot of work. This is a lot of time. I don't have any time to do this. And I believe that there was a letter submitted to council requesting an extension for this particular meeting to be addressed, this item to be addressed today, just literally so that we could actually start to disseminate some of the changes that are proposed, because there are going to be financial losses, and there are going to be losses to health. And some of the items that I just came up with right off the bat was, in the actual bylaws were removal of greenhouses from front yards, and a change of some of the things that matter to our community's well-being. And realistically, it wouldn't have been very much for Jonas or one of the other planners to put together a nice video presentation breaking down some of the important necessary steps that are involved in this bylaw. And that's in all the different changes, but it's a lot for me as a person to go and spend the time, after work or whenever it is, to read 500 pages and then have literally 3 days to present a proper presentation before council. And I think that could have been eliminated just through proper engagement. So just to my main points, I haven't seen any financial reports from council saying how this is going to financially impact the neighborhood. We know that the developers at some point are going to be able to increase their square footage. Some maybe not particularly now, but at some point this is opening up the doors. Now, at 1,000 square foot on a development, $800 per square foot is $800,000 value for that development in increased revenue. That gives them a lot of reason to want to have these setbacks.
30 seconds, Mr. Forsyth. You have 30 seconds left.
Thank you kindly. And so that's my main issue, is that it appears that the setbacks specifically have to do with making money for the developers, not necessarily taking into account the health and well-being and the financial aspect of the current existing neighborhoods. And I believe that the district, you guys have a great ability to provide video and break down the stuff that we can't quite understand, and then perhaps make our community a little bit better place by having.
If you could wrap up now, please.
Yes, that's all I'd like to say. I do appreciate your time, and I'll look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thank you very much for your submission this evening. Is there anyone else in council chambers that wishes to speak? Please come forward, say your name, leave your mask on until you get to the podium, say your name and neighborhood, and you have 5 minutes.
Hi. Can you hear me? I wasn't really planning on speaking tonight, but I really wanted to support our neighbors down in the area. My name is Della Halverson. I'm from Brackendale, and I'm against the changes proposed. These amendments are being portrayed as insignificant and harmless, when in fact they could have huge ramifications on the livability of our neighborhoods, and yet the members of the community are barely given any notice on such an impactful change. As elected officials, I thought that you would consider the decisions and how they affect current residents. However, it feels that at every turn, we are being pushed to the back burner in favor of developers. The pandemic has been extremely stressful, yet it feels council has used the restrictions to their advantage to push things through that would otherwise take more time if it were to have the proper community engagement. So I'm just requesting that you please pause and consider the ramifications of these general amendments on your current citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Halverson. There's no applause, please. We try and keep the public hearings really neutral so that people can speak for and against without feeling like they're intimidated or have to do that in fear. So just ask everyone to hold their applause. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? I'll go to online, *3 on your phone, or the participant panel to click on the hand icon.
John Jervis, our next speaker. If you could please state your name and neighborhood for the record. You have 5 minutes to address council, and you can go ahead now, please.
Hi, it's John Jervis, Paradise Valley. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay, great.
Yes, we can.
Mayor and Council, hello. I miss seeing you all in person, so it's nice to be here in this. And I just wanted to deviate from what the current topic is here, and this is just specific to the RL2 zoning in Paradise Valley. And I just wanted to point out that there is effectively a loss of buildable area there, which is ultimately a down zone. As for the building, principal dwelling living area, it's going from 557 square meters down to 500. I would like to see if there's a reduction there. I'd like to see a very strong reasoning for it. Otherwise, I'd suggest it would just be great to leave it as is. The other thing is that there's a revision here where they're taking away the ability to have a caretaker unit. Of course, we gain the ability to have a carriage home, but in effect, what's existing in the zoning is a caretaker house with a living space of 139.5 square meters. And the best we can do under a carriage home scenario is 90 square meters. So there is a loss there. And I do think that the agricultural rural land is obviously a special case scenario out there. Having a lot that's bigger than 2 hectares sort of points to the notion that we shouldn't be held to the smaller standards of the smaller lots in town. So I'm just hoping that can be addressed. One other small point that a neighbor has brought up, has asked me to ask about, there is a technicality in this bylaw that states you can't have an accessory building in the front yard. And when you've got a lot that's 1,500 feet long and the principal dwelling is in the middle, your front yard tends to be about 500 or 600 feet. So in him wanting to put a barn there was basically not possible because of the technicality. So I'm wondering if that could be addressed in this zoning. I know it's a small technical thing, but I just wanted to point it out and say thanks to everyone very much. Have a good night.
Thank you, Mr. Jervis. Is there another person online that wishes to speak?
Not at the moment, Mayor Elliott.
Is there anyone at Municipal Hall that wishes to speak this evening? Just raise your hand. Seeing none, just a reminder to folks online, it's *3 if you're on the phone, or raise your hand in the participant panel. Do you have someone else? Great.
Mayor Elliott, we have Robert Forsyth again. Robert, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to clearly indicate that I'm not for pushing this particular series of bylaws through or changes. I do believe that it should go back to staff. Staff should be directed to have a proper Q&A, at least explaining how this is going to work. I also believe that there should have been a more broad spectrum communication throughout even us here in Brackendale. Earlier in this game. There's just too much information to break down. I strongly believe that that we could do better. And the financial, the reason I am mainly against it is that, like the one gentleman said, he's going to be affected financially by the changes, even in a rural setting. So there's so many different parts that really it's very challenging for each individual to go through, and really perhaps this is something that should be addressed in the future if it can't be nipped in the butt now, which I believe it could. Is just have the people that know all the break it down for us laymen. I do appreciate your time, and I thank councillors, and I hope you will make the right decision and send this back based off of not enough transparency. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll take this moment to just check with council to see if you've heard anything this evening that requires clarifying question to staff. Councillor Stoner?
Staff, a suggestion that setback would.
Councillor Stoner, we've lost your audio a little bit. Do you want to try turning your video off?
Is that any better?
Yes, it is. Thanks.
There we go. Thanks. I just want to clarify. I heard a suggestion that changing back would increase the allowable gross floor area or density of a development. It's my understanding that that is not the case, and clarify that with staff.
Through the mayor, your understanding is correct. These setbacks deal with the siting of the building. The size of the building is set by the maximum density in the or the floor area ratio, which is the size of the building that's allowed to be built on the lot. Setbacks are related to the siting of the building.
Mr. Daly, we haven't talked about the RL2 zoning in quite some time. I know we addressed this at a previous meeting, but could you remind me why the changes were made on that?
Those changes were made to bring the maximum buildable area in that zone in line with the Agri 3 zone. There is potential that the rural residential zones will be reviewed in a future zoning bylaw update that deals with agricultural zoning to bring the properties that are located in the ALR in line with the ALC regulations. So the zoning and the ALC regs speak to one another as opposed to not doing that.
Thank you. Any other questions, council? Councilor Reese? Then Hereford.
Well, just on the last point through Mr. Daly, is there a timeline for that? Do we know when that might be coming to council?
I would have to defer to my director for the answer to that question.
Thank you, Brian. So the project to review agricultural zoning, and that would include rural residential zoning, is right after the marine zoning amendments that are in progress right now. So that will be the next stage. So I think it's it will be a project that will likely start at some point later this year.
Councilor Hereford?
Thank you. One speaker brought up the point around the not allowing accessory buildings in the front yard and of these larger properties. I was just curious about that particular piece because I hadn't encountered that previously. I understand it on a more residential lot. It kind of makes sense for the most part, I think. But what's driving that?
So through the mayor, that is not a proposed amendment. That is an existing condition in the zoning bylaw. Section 4.4 regulates accessory buildings, and it does not allow accessory buildings in a front yard. So there's no changes proposed to that at this time.
And if I could just add to that, because people often think that the front yard, is kind of like anything between where the principal building is, such as a house, and the property line at the front, but that's not actually the case. So the front yard just means that it can't go past the setback of a principal building. So if you've got a really long lot and say a 7-meter front yard setback, but your house is set back 30 meters away, you can still put an accessory building in the front yard. It just can't pass, because accessory buildings have smaller setbacks, so it can't pass the principal building setback. And I think that a few years ago, we did clarify that. So it used to be the case that you couldn't put a building in front of your house, but that is no longer the case. And it was through one of these housekeeping amendments.
Thank you. Yeah, I hadn't encountered that before, so it piqued my interest. Some of the discussion tonight's around has sort of been around, not to sum up all of the comments, but around privacy, natural light, sort of interface with the existing built area. And could someone comment on those regulations, I believe, exist more in our development permit areas, and how those regulations sort of overlay with the zoning in the general sense, just so that it's clear which piece would be most appropriate to adjust if adjustment was needed.
Through the mayor, I believe that setbacks deal with the siting of the building, and obviously there's a number of factors that would impact privacy and light. Height and massing of buildings also have a substantial impact on light as well. And there are development permit area guidelines that speak to preserving or reducing massing to preserve natural light and things like that. So they all do, I guess, contribute to privacy and the preservation of light. But the massing of the building, I suppose, would probably be the one that has the greatest impact, because you could have a building built right up to a property line that's extremely narrow and doesn't have nearly as much of an impact as, say, for example, a 20-foot wide building as opposed to an 80-foot wide building would have a much more substantial impact on light. So massing would probably have the greatest impact on natural light. And then I'll defer to my director if he has anything he wants to add to that.
Yeah, just really quickly, I think the Wilson Crescent proposal that we've seen a few weeks ago, it was a good example of what happens when you reduce the setback, but you keep the density provisions the same in terms of the floor area ratio that controls density. So what you see is breaking up of the buildings on the property, which you could argue have a positive impact to other properties. So you've kind of spread out the buildings across the property a bit more. Then if you have a more restrictive setbacks, what tends to happen is, a single or two buildings kind of concentrated in one area. And that could have different impacts depending on which adjacent property you are, whether you're in the back or you're on the side. If you're on the side, having that separation could actually improve your privacy and your views. So it's a relative question, I guess, and the impacts are not the same on all adjacent property owners.
Thank you. With the when contemplating these adjustments to the setbacks, did anything come up with that regulation around the development permit areas need to be adjusted, sort of, so they move hand in hand with each other, to perhaps make some changes there to help mitigate the potential negative impacts of these changes?
Through you, Mayor, that's correct. So we do have a project scheduled for next year to review our development permit area guidelines. And that would be certainly something that we can take a look at in that process.
Councillor French.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to know what, if any, impact would adoption of this bylaw update, as it's presented in its current state, have on the rezoning application that's currently being considered at 1189 and 1201 Wilson Crescent? How do they interplay?
For you, Mayor, Brian, I can take this one just because I was there and have a bit maybe more familiarity with that file. So that development proposal had a number of variance requests, and the rear yard setback was one of them. I believe the rear yard setback request was at 6.5 meters to the patios of in the rear. So that would mean that variance would be no longer required if the proponents decided to proceed with the application. We're not sure what the proponents are going to do, whether they're going to want to come back or not. But that development had other variances as well that they were requesting. So, you know, if they were, if this bylaw was approved and development wanted to move forward with the rest of the variances, it would have to come back to council for approval.
Okay, thank you. And this evening, we've heard talk about financial impacts if setbacks are reduced. And I think that's probably a specific reference to thought that property values would decrease. So I'd like to know if staff is aware of any data that supports the claim, or you could just talk generally about this thought of financial impacts.
Sure. Brian, I could take this one too. For you, Mayor, so there is no data that would suggest, you know, that reducing a setback has a financial impact on the adjacent property. It is something that we hear, you know, as an opinion from neighbors quite often. But unfortunately, you know, there really isn't any data to support this claim in terms of research on real estate values. And, you know, in Squamish, it's quite clearly has been going up with quite a bit of development as well. And we haven't seen that effect of a development on adjacent properties.
Thank you.
Councillor Stoner?
Do not set back. Mr. Daly, I noticed change the
Miss Councillor Stoner, we can't hear you.
Sorry, is that better?
Go ahead.
Mr. Daly, we are proposing increase height for light industrial I-1 I-4 from 10 meters to 15. I'm wondering if you can remind me of the rationale for that.
Through the mayor, the rationale behind that amendment is that when we implemented the business park industrial zoning, the I-11 zone, we increased the height from 10.68 meters to 15 meters. And it was not increased in I-4, and there are a few properties zoned I-4 in the industrial park. So increasing that height was to bring it in line with the I-11 business park industrial zoning. And we were also increasing the height in the light industrial zone to be consistent with that as well.
Thank you. Thank you for that reminder. And then I just also wanted to clarify changes under the bicycle parking requirements for Class B requirements for all non-residences was a little bit confusing to me when I read it. The first line requires a minimum of 6 Class B spaces for 500 meters square gross floor area. But then the last line said six Class B spaces for 1,000 squared. So I'm just wondering if you could clarify those two line items.
Through the mayor, that is, it is intended to suggest that there is an additional 6 bicycle parking spaces when you exceed the 1,000 square meters of gross floor area.
Councillor Pentgill, and then we do have another speaker.
Thanks. I'm just wanting to understand a little bit the relationship between floor area ratio, setbacks, and maximum lot coverage. Because I understand the only proposal here is to change setbacks, but it doesn't change maximum lot coverage or floor area ratio. When I looked at maximum lot coverage, some of the lots are irregularly shaped and small enough that you couldn't ever hit the maximum building area with the setbacks formerly or current. And so setbacks do become somewhat a limiting factor, but I hadn't thought about the floor area ratio. And so I guess then height comes into it. So I'm just wondering, in the smaller and irregular shaped lots, is the floor area ratio typically the limiting factor in terms of building size overall, or is it the setbacks? Because it seems it's not the maximum buildable area.
So through the mayor, obviously it varies for very strangely shaped parcels, but essentially the easiest way to think of it is the setbacks are the siting of the building, so where the building can and cannot go. Lot coverage is the footprint of the buildings on the site, and then the gross floor area is the amount of living space that, or the building area that, or how large a building, like the square footage that a building can be. And then there's obviously associated exemptions such as parking areas, bike parking, and things like that that are exempted from the calculation of gross floor area. So the overall measure of density in these multiple unit residential zones is gross floor area, so the building area.
And so if that's not proposed to be changed, but between the height and the setback restrictions, are you always going to be under the floor area ratio anyways in either case, or is the floor area ratio legitimately the limiting factor in these smaller lots typically?
Typically it is, but there are exceptions, and height can become a limiting factor in that.
Okay, we're going to go back to our speakers. We have someone online.
Charlotte Whitney, you are our next speaker. If you could please state your name and neighborhood for the record, and you have 5 minutes to address council. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Council, and thank you, Mayor. Yeah, my name is Charlotte Whitney. I'm a resident of the Falls development, which you'll be familiar with on Eaglewind. It's relatively new. I also want to start by acknowledging my, similarly as many of the panelists today or the speakers, my support for densification in theory, but also point out the impact of densification if done without sufficient consideration of the interaction between rear and sidewalls. And I think in this case, it's really comparable to the issue of setbacks, specifically in terms of our interaction with both the natural environment as well as our adjacent community members. And community, I think we would all agree, is really important, especially in these issues of densification and dense planned communities like the one that we live in. In our home, the distance between the back of our townhome to the sidewall of the perpendicular adjacent townhome is just 8.4 meters, so larger than the setbacks discussed, but not really that different than the initial proposed setbacks. This interaction of rear walls to sidewalls is found in a number of homes in Eaglewind. It's very clear to us as residents that even 3 stories of building and the setback that I mentioned impacts both natural light and view significantly. While our unit has one of the larger yards due to the close adjacency of the perpendicular townhomes nearby, we still get a very narrow window of afternoon light in the back of our yards. I will also add that, again, in addition to those impacts on natural light, view, and interaction with the natural environment, which I would echo the previous speakers, is incredibly important to us as residents of Squamish, and also in a climate chaos future, we are cut off from our backyard neighbors, which limits social interaction and opportunities to create community. For example, a consideration could be a path between the back of our homes and the side of their adjacent yards, and the lack of this detracts from neighborhood connection. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your submission. Anyone else online at this point?
Robert Forsyth, you're our next speaker. Please go ahead.
Thank you, through the mayor. Yes, for clarification, so I was very thankful to hear that the setbacks proposals is not going to change the allowable square footage of usable space for the developments. But I would like to point out that that's sort of the next step. So maybe not this year, but at some point, the evolution of this proposal will definitely go there. And then I also heard that there was no numbers associated with financial loss or gain. And in fact, I believe it was said that only an increase in property value by densifying the areas around is the basic trend. Well, I'd like to inform staff and council that the majority of people that have lived here in this community for dozens of years don't really care if their properties go up in value because they don't have any intentions of selling. What they do care about is their property taxes going up. And many of the residents here in Brackendale paid up to $500 extra last year with the property tax increases that were done through the management of the corporation. And it really is kind of astounding that this isn't taken into account. The fact that you have 9 or 8 people that are directly affected by this Wilson Crescent development that stood just a couple of weeks ago up before council in regards to this. And I mean, there was other variances like Jonas stated, but the reality is that not everybody wants to have an increase in property taxes because they would have to sell, and then really where would they buy? Because everything is going up equally all throughout British Columbia. So unless you really want to move out of town, and that seems to be the trend. A lot of people are being pushed out of town through this densification and through this increased costs. And as an advocate for like low income, low rental housing and available product, you know, I do run a group with 15,000 members in it called Squamish Housing for Rent for locals. Have run that I think for 7 years free of charge for the community. It's pretty much self-manages itself, but the community is growing extremely fast, 50 people a day. So this is, you know, we get to join that group quite often. And so this is a real thing that we have to deal with, densification and balancing out, you know, all the different public amenities and all the other things that we need to do. But it shouldn't always be considered that the existing residents want to just start paying more money because of a project based off of a fairly large profit wants to go through. Just like to point out that some of the properties in Squamish are up to $800 per square foot. So the next line of, you know, the next step for this particular bylaw would be obviously densifying to square footage. So if you have a development that adds 1,000 square feet, that's $800,000 value at the loss of the existing neighborhoods. And so this is the reality that some of these things may really only benefit the developers and not actually negatively impact the residents that have called Squamish their home for dozens of years. And that's to my point, a lot of people move to Squamish to get away from the densification of the cities. And so it seems that a lot of the people that are coming to the cities are coming to Squamish because they dislike the city are now coming here and trying to change it to look like the city. And that's kind of something that I'm not really impressed with. And it appears that perhaps some of the direction our council and staff is going towards is leaning towards that sort of city lifestyle. And not everybody wants it. That's kind of why we settled here for 30 plus years and why a lot of us are now considering moving somewhere else. So I thank you for your time, council. And again, I'm not for this particular the zoning specific, and I'm not for the short time that the rest of the community has had as an opportunity to really evaluate and disseminate all this information that should have been. I believe that the council was elected by us, the community, and I believe the staff are financed by us, the community, and I believe that the community should have
30 seconds, Mr. Forsyth.
Yes, thank you. I'll end it very quickly. I just believe that we should have proper engagement for the money that we're paying, especially when our property taxes are increasing like $400, $500 at a time every year based off of the decisions made in this council. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time.
Okay, I'll just make a call for other speakers. If you haven't spoken yet, please raise your hand. If there's any new speakers that haven't spoken yet. We have one online. Please go ahead.
Devin, you're our next speaker. If you could state your full name and neighborhood for the record, and you have 5 minutes to address council. Go ahead, please.
Hello, I'm Devinder Biln. I'm living in Garibaldi Estates, and I'd like to echo some of the comments of the previous speakers and thank them for bringing the matter to my attention. I would consider myself an above average in terms of engagement as a citizen, and this sort of took me off guard. I first learned about it, I guess Friday, and through the petition. And I'd like to echo Mr. Forsyth's comments that I'd like a little bit more time to go through some of the proposed changes to the bylaw. I think the zoning bylaw is probably one of the most important bylaws that we have as a community to control growth and building and density. And I looked through, had a very cursory look through, and there are just so many changes to digest, and I just don't have enough time to look at that. And so I would ask council to send this back to staff for more time, more community engagement. I really don't feel engaged, and thank you very much.
Thank you for your submission. Are there any other speakers who haven't spoken yet this evening? All right, any speakers that would like to speak a second time, and please make sure that you're adding new information. You're not speaking to the same points you raised in your first submission. That would be helpful. I'll go here first and then over to you.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Jamie Martin, Finch Drive. I just wanted to understand there's a height bylaw coming for RL2 for accessory buildings, I believe. Right now it's at 6 meters. Right now there's a coach house that's being proposed over existing garage. And I believe the building height for regular coach houses in RS1 is higher. Right now, that would actually, in RL2, it's I believe this is a catch up to this bylaw. The ceiling height would only be 6'8" or 6'10" if it existed for RL2. So I'm in support of that height bylaw that's coming this evening for that, so they can at least have a proper ceiling. And I have to reiterate that I guess this is all into one big package. You can't extrapolate certain bylaws that are going to be really important, but if this thing goes back to staff, then I guess there's a bunch of variances coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Council can sever items as long as they don't change density or use. So council can sever items from the bylaw if they don't change density or use at third reading. So there is the potential to approve the majority and send some of it back. Yes. Mr. Walton.
Matty Walton again. The shade report, it's very encouraging to see a winter shade report done by staff presented tonight. And it does show that there is some weight put on what shadow is going to be cast on adjacent properties. I'd like to point out, though, that shade report is at the meridian at midday in the middle of winter. So we're not looking at any time other than that. So it's, even though it's what I think 80 centimeters or 0.8 of a meter or something, not a big difference, but it's going to mean an hour or more or an extra few weeks, even a month of extra sun on the second level. It's not just a small impact, even a meter. I think the example was given. Also, on the looking at the shade report, we live on a floodplain, so we've got tall buildings here. We've got 3-story, everything's 3 stories that's going up or more. So it's not just 2. So we weren't on the floodplain, we wouldn't have the garages on the base, I mean, a non-living area. So that's something should be, if that was taken into consideration, you'd have more space between buildings because you're going to have a longer shade cast. Staff have commented tonight that, and I'm quoting, impacts are not the same for each property development. And another comment quoting Wilson Crescent is challenging. So just on those two statements, it would be very hard to justify having a blanket decrease in rear setbacks across the board for the RM1, 2 and 3 zones because you're not looking at individual properties. If it creates work for staff and the council, well, that's not really a consideration because we're looking at individual homes. I'd like to point out our petition is now up to 344, which is, I'm just trying to do the math here, 52 greater than at 9 o'clock this morning when it was emailed in. Property values, it was commented that there's no evidence to support that property values would go down, or I'm suggesting that if you put up a very tall building next to another building and block out the views and create shade, I don't think property values are going to go up. So I think property values should be considered. And my last point to the mayor, it's very nervous for people to get up here, and that's why there's not many people talking. And clapping before was for a very nervous speaker that wasn't going to speak. So it's just encouragement for people to get up here and engage the council. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers in Municipal Hall? Do we have another speaker online? Is this a repeat speaker or a new speaker?
It's a new speaker, Mayor Elliott. Shoshana, you're our next speaker. If you could please state your name, full name and neighborhood for the record. You have 5 minutes to address council. And you can go ahead now, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Sorry. My name is Shoshana Kitame. I live in the North Yard on Government Road. I did submit a quick note to council with regards to this bylaw and the side setbacks and the rear setbacks. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, or if it's the right number or not, or if neighborhoods that have had specific neighborhood plans or micro.
Shoshana, we just lost your feed there. She's still there?
She's still there, Mayor Elliott, but we've lost contact.
Hello, can you hear me?
There, you're back.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Wait.
Go ahead.
I don't even know if I'm on the phone or the computer anymore. I'm 53. I don't know how to do this. Anyways, I sent in a note. I just want to emphasize that I sent in a picture of development that's right behind my house. That is 47 years old, and the setback behind that is very, very small. It's possibly even about 4 meters, 4 or 5 meters. And so I just want to emphasize to people who might think this is a new thing in Squamish, or this is something people wouldn't have expected if they moved here for the great outdoors or whatever, or they think that if they've lived here for 30 years that this shouldn't happen. 47 years ago, Squamish allowed a townhouse development to be built on No Name Road with about 12 feet behind it. So I don't know what the right number is, or if special, I don't know when I got cut off, but I don't know if special neighborhoods with micro neighborhood planning situations need to be removed from this, or left with their neighborhood planning process or not. But in general, I think it's absolutely fine to align an omnibus distance setback that is standard in Squamish, and certainly has a precedent up to 47 years ago, even smaller. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your submission.
Thank you.
If there are no further speakers, I would ask council if there's any further information that the planning department might provide in response to any comments or questions raised by the member of the public. Seeing no hands. Now that I've heard from everyone on the speakers list, it's a requirement that I ask 3 times if there is anyone else who wishes to speak before we can close the public hearing. For the first time, is there anyone else who wants to speak or make a submission? So that *3 or the hand icon if you're on WebEx. For a second time, is there anyone else who wants to speak or make a submission?
We have another speaker, Mayor Elliott.
Is this a new speaker?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Greg, you're our next speaker. If you could please state your name and neighborhood for the record. You have 5 minutes to address council, and you can go ahead, please.
Well, thank you. My name is Greg Pilon. I live at 38447 Bucky. That's the Arbutus Grove, unit number 1. I've spoken to you before with regards to the Wilson Crescent variance application. And for obvious reasons, this bylaw amendment will affect us in exactly the same way as the variance request we discussed before. The question I have, I won't add to the comments that are made by my neighbors, all of which I support wholeheartedly. But the challenge that I have at this point is to understand what the purpose of the setback variance, or pardon me, the setback amendment is in this case. I have been told that it does not affect density, but I think as Robert, the earlier speaker, said, if you make more space for houses eventually, the temptation will be to increase square footage accordingly. So I think that that's a kind of a disingenuous argument. It's also been, I've heard references to shared common outdoor areas. That's one of the advantages that this setback reduction will provide. The last time I checked, we lived in British Columbia in the middle of the Canadian Rockies. So personal outdoor space is really not a problem for us. Again, the argument is disingenuous. And then finally, I've heard that this is appropriate because it's going to bring us in line with other communities in well, I guess in BC. And I challenge that argument as well. I mean, this is kind of a, if Johnny jumped off a bridge, would you jump too? It's, we're not Surrey, we're not Gibson, we're not North Van, and I don't want us to become Maple Ridge. So I think the argument that we should adopt setback standards from other communities with very different geographic and historic considerations is, again, wrong-headed. So again, I'm really wondering what the purpose of the setback adjustment is, and I would like to see a consideration whereby those components of this bylaw would be removed, severed, and the bylaw allowed to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you for your submission. So I will ask again for a first time, is there anyone else who wants to make a submission or speak this evening? For a second time, is there anyone else who wants to speak or make a submission? And for a third and final time, is there anyone else who wants to speak or make a submission? So that's *3 or the hand icon if you're online. Just raise your hand if you're here in City Hall.
Robert, Forsyth, you are our next speaker. Please go ahead.
Mr. Forsyth, please limit your comments to new comments related to the bylaw. Thank you.
For sure. So the community charter that the provincial government has given us and some of the bylaws, there was something I remember seeing buried, like some of the information pertaining to the bylaw changes and some of the stuff that the council has done in the most recent past month or so that I've been involved in, trying to figure out what's going on. I have noticed that there was an ability for council to create a more robust online system or even different types of systems when it came to public engagement, even to asset voting, if that was what it came down to. And I did have a conversation with corporate officer a couple last week, I guess it was, in discussion.
Can you please relate your comments back to the bylaw in front of us, please?
I am, please, ma'am, sorry, I'm not trying to confuse you, but it just take us a few seconds to give you the context of the understanding. So I do believe that it's within our legal rights or the council's legal ability to develop perhaps a new method of communicating with the community, and then maybe even having like polls or voting just to get some general understanding of how the whole community feels. I'm here sitting with a couple of my friends that are also residents of the community, but are shy because they don't really know how to engage. And even the phone system here, I had to go to data, but I wanted to call in with the phone. And even the communication that we're able to engage today, even though it is working, it took almost a half an hour. And like one of the ladies said that spoke before me, she's having challenging aspects to be able to do this online engagement. I really look forward to, when we're fully able to really get back to getting people into council chambers. But until then, I would like to think that we could work on perhaps something that's more electronic, because even our electoral forms, collecting 1,800 signatures for a previous bylaw that was proposed on the AVP was very challenging. And I think that this is what we're having, listening to people coming up from the Highlands, from Brackendale, from other parts of the community, my friends here included, they didn't really understand what was going on and why the short notice. So that's our concern as a community, I believe, that we should have, the information, not just sort of, thrown into 500 pages that we have to try to figure out the backstory behind everything. And I believe that we have the technology to do that. And I like seeing the presentations that Jonas presents, so I would always look forward to that. But I'd like to take my time and thank you very much. I appreciate everyone and have a good evening.
Thank you. So for the first time, is there anyone else who wants to speak or make a submission? For a second time, is there anyone else who wants to speak or make a submission? And for the third and final time, is there anyone else who wants to speak or make a submission this evening? Please note that council members are not permitted to receive any further submissions or hear either a proponent or opponent to an application once the public hearing has been concluded. So this means we can't speak out in the community or receive emails or phone calls on any of these bylaws until a decision on the bylaws has been made. Any and all communication from this point must be channeled to staff. Although I will let folks know that we do have contemplation of third reading on the agenda this evening. If there are no further speakers, I declare the hearing closed. Thank you very much for your submissions this evening and for participating in this process. Council, because we have interested parties, I'm wondering if you'll suspend the order of the agenda and we can jump to item 8B1. And this is to contemplate third reading. Mr. Daly, I might ask you to put up the slide again around options regarding third reading.
Were you specifically referencing the alternative recommendation?
I just wanted to see, yes, so I just want to speak to this, council. So as you debate third reading and consider the motions that you want to put on the floor or potentially amend, we can adopt the agenda and sever clauses as long as they do not impact the use, increased density. So those are the guidelines this evening. So there is a recommended motion, which is to give third reading. Staff have also proposed an alternate motion for council's consideration. And I just wanted to remind you of those guidelines. All right, Councillor Stoner, I saw your hand.
Yeah, sorry, and I can cross-reference this, but I'm just wondering if staff can clarify sections Y. I know sections G, double H, and double I are the RM zoning. Can staff just clarify what the Y, double A, and double D are?
Through the mayor, those are the setbacks related to the narrow lots in RS1, RS1A, and RS2. So the addition of a 1.52 meter setback for lots that are 33 feet in width or narrower.
Councillor Pengill.
Yeah, the balconies one, 4.11C, does that impact density or? Just curious. Okay, thank you.
There was a visual, I think you need to speak it out loud, Mr.
Apologies.
Daly.
No, it does not affect density.
Councillor Herford.
We'll take first swing at this and we'll see how we go. I would like to move the alternate recommendation here, but with severing G, G, H, H, and I, which is a strange sentence to say out loud, but so that's dealing with the RM bits. The reduced setbacks in those narrow lots made sense to me, and I'm happy to proceed with those, but I think that that we've heard we have more work to do. So anyways, I'll speak to it if that's seconded. But so this, but without the Y, AA, and double D, which should leave the RM rear setback.
Is that your understanding,
Is
Mr.
that
Daly?
That is correct.
That's what I'm doing, to be clear.
Is there a seconder for that motion?
Sorry.
Are you,
Can I question the mover? You said pulling those out would leave the rear setback. I thought those three were the rear setback ones.
But the alternate, so this recommendation recommends that we sever all of those. I'm suggesting we only sever the rear setback pieces, the last three items on that list. So I'm severing bits from the severing, which is confusing, but those last three items relate to the rear setback. The other ones I'm fine with. So we're leaving G, G, H, H, and I in this motion, not in the package.
those are the RM zones that are
that clear?
being severed. Does that make it clear?
Is that clearer? Yeah.
Okay. Is there a seconder for this motion? Councillor Pettengill seconds. Do you wish to speak to your motion, Councillor Herford?
I will. Thank you. I think this is an appropriate course of action. I think we have some more work to do on engagement, if nothing else. I don't know if we'll land at a different spot with these rear setbacks, but through this process, I've different pieces of sort of clicked for me around how they interface with different side setbacks and different implications throughout the neighborhood. And these seem to be the sticking points for the community. So I think we can progress with the work that the good work that's been done in other areas here. And we have some more work to do in this area, should we want to contemplate these changes in future, those specific changes around the rear setback. I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Councillor Pettengill, did you wish to speak to it? Councillor Race.
Thank you. And I had sort of a similar motion in mind. I would have left the others in just to talk about them all at once, but I'm happy to support this motion. And I am, first of all, okay with the majority of the bylaw and the changes staff have suggested. My concern is really confined to the setbacks and primarily the setbacks for the multifamily. One of the common concerns I hear from the community is that with this process of densification and development that we're going through, is things are kind of too close together, which is a simplistic way of putting it, but just too much in too small an area. And I think it's caused me to think about this a little bit. I mean, it's one thing certainly to densify a development area, and I've supported those types of applications over the past years. But it's another thing to densify and then densify next door kind of too close together. And so I think that's my concern. And the experience of other communities, that staff has provided on different issues like this is, for me, is helpful, but it's not defining. I mean, I think in the Lower Mainland, if you took a 6-story building, a lot of people down there would call it gentle density. But up in Squamish, I think it's called a skyscraper. And so it's just not quite the same situation. Staff have been to council with this now several times. And I suppose in a perfect world, I'd have raised these comments earlier. But lacking perfection, I think for me, it's more a case of better late than never. Because I think what we're talking about here, and I first started thinking about this actually when we had a conversation several months ago, actually, when the Director of Planning, Mr. Velanishkas, came and asked Council about the amenity contribution policy that we had. And one of the things that came out of that discussion, and one of the things that was put on the floor, was the possibility of more open space and developments. And on a rezoning, trying to obtain that for public use. And that's still out being considered. And then certainly a few weeks ago, we had the development permit application for Wilson Crescent. And many of the same people spoke. And so that really actually got me thinking. I think it really focused me on this issue where I wasn't really as focused before. And then now recently, of course, we've had correspondence, which I've read and heard from speakers, both 4 weeks ago or 4 or 5 weeks ago and also tonight. And so I'm kind of at the point where I feel that we have to kind of give some more thought to how we're planning our neighborhoods. We've recently completed a sub-area plan at Loggers East. We're in the midst of another one, Garibaldi Estates. There's potential new developments, which are presently greenfield, where we're designing from sort of ground up. And I think we have to give some thought to how we want those to look and the character of those. And part of that, for me, is the amount of open space. And open space, I think we all know, and we heard the comments tonight, it impacts sunlight, it impacts green space, vegetation, it impacts shading, some of which is helpful, like vegetation shading, some of which is not necessarily, like building shading, impacts view corridors and sight lines. And those are important things. And I think we're at the point now where we have a chance to really examine that and decide how we want to go forward. And I was going to suggest that we take all of the setback issues and take them away together. I can live with the multifamily. I think that is the most pressing part of it. But I think it really is kind of a discussion we want to have as a council and a community about what we want our future neighborhoods to look like. Certainly, we expect them to be more dense than some of the single family neighborhoods. I don't think there's any argument about that, but I think it's how we manage that density and the relationship of the density to each other. And if we're going to add more open space here, do we do something else somewhere else? And I don't want to prejudge that. I really don't know. And some of these, there's 3 different categories here. Some might change, some might be expanded, some might be shrunk. But I think that's a future discussion. I don't expect us to solve that issue tonight. But I do think it's an issue that we really do want to see a little bit more of. So I'm supporting this, which would, I expect, go back to staff and be packaged together for a discussion, probably starting at committee of the whole and carrying on from there. Thank you.
I have Councillor Anderson, then Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. I'll be speaking in support of the motion. I'd like to just also remind myself here to thank staff, acknowledge staff for the illustrations and examples provided in your presentation tonight. Helpful for this ominous, complex package that we have before us is much appreciated. I'll come back to one of those examples. So we have the planning department and council, we have some dilemmas here. One of the examples Mr. Daly referred to earlier and Mr. Vilaniska spoke to was the Northridge cul-de-sac. And this was a neighborhood developed in the 1980s. And it was low-cost housing, and that was the ambition. But it's been nothing but a burden to address any changes to those homes in that area. And as Mr. Vilaniska has said, they have to keep coming back for variances. So I think I'm trying to balance these things here. I think that we cannot take a case-by-case approach. That approach has been a real burden for the situation in the Northridge cul-de-sac and other situations. We can't take a cookie-cutter approach in that respect either and apply case-by-case. It's just not practical. We have to see the merits of planning department's need for housekeeping. And in fact, practically to address housekeeping in an omnibus package. We just have to live with that and do our best with the information and engagement challenges involved. We have to understand the need for flexibility to address challenging circumstances of older neighborhoods. And we also have to recognize that there are other bylaw requirements that do protect neighborhoods that developers have to comply with, other zoning bylaw requirements. However, we have public concerns, and I think that they are legitimate. As has been mentioned, if it hadn't been for those variances of a couple of weeks ago, our knowledge and awareness wouldn't have been awakened. And I think that's a very interesting observation and a relevant one for us, one for us to consider. We have examples of things that came about through omnibus packages that have aroused concerns have arisen. For me, it's triplexes on corner lots, but I don't need to go off on a tangent on that, but they've slipped through and I frankly am concerned with what can happen with some of these things that we don't see the consequences. Therefore, the importance, as Councillor Race has suggested, of good neighborhood plans, as I take it that Councillor Race was suggesting, for understanding and responding to nuances and complicated layers of circumstances and values in each neighborhood. So a little bit of a pause here. Much of this, the rest of the package I can be in support of, but I'm in support of taking a pause on the matter that Councillor Herford has extracted from the recommendation concerning the RM1 zones. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner.
Before turn my video off. Before I speak to the motion, I'd like to propose an amendment that we include section 4.11C in the items that are severed. So that would be the balcony projections. If that's seconded, I'll speak to it.
Councillor Pettengill seconds.
Thank you. I am proposing that we include this as well for review along with the multifamily proposed reduced rear yard setbacks, because I think that they go hand in hand. Staff did provide some rationale as to how we got to the 0.76 allowable projection. But there was a lot of variability in the case studies that were provided. And I think that it could go from 0.6 meters to 1.5 meters, depending on the side of the setback and the length of the setback. So if that rear setback is 9.51 meters, then that projection might be much greater than if that setback is 6.0 meters. So to me, they go hand in hand, which is why I would like to see them all taken out at this point.
Anyone else wants to speak to the amendment? Councillor Herford, Councillor Pettengill, and then I'll put myself on the list.
Thank you. I support that this amendment. I think I do think that I was comfortable with where it was, but as we're considering the potentially the greater setbacks overall for the building, that those projections of the balcony should be considered together. So that makes sense to me. So I'll be supporting this. And thank you for bringing this forward, Councillor Stoner.
Thanks. I'm going to support this as well. I was a bit on the fence with this one, but I think Councillor Stoner makes a compelling point, and it does make sense. The further the setbacks are, it may make sense to allow more extension into the setbacks from balconies, but we'll see how those things go together. Thanks.
I just have a point of clarification for, I can speak it to the end. It's just about what section you would be specifically removing because it's referenced differently, but I'll save my comments till the end.
All right. Stoner, can you repeat the section?
Yeah, it's in my package, it's 4.11 item C. So balconies not to exceed a projection of 0.76 meters into the front, rear, interior, exterior, side setback areas.
Is that the correct one, Mr. Daly?
Mr. Daly needs to turn his microphone on, please.
My apologies. It's in subsection L of the amending bylaw. So subsection L will have to be amended to delete 4.11 subsection C. Just wanted to make sure that the motion is correct.
Is that clear to the seconder? Is that what your intent, Councillor Stoner? Thank you. I'm not going to support the amendment. I certainly don't mind reviewing this if the bylaw severs the setback piece, but these balcony projections make sure that on taller buildings, people actually have usable outdoor space. And what we do in delaying adoption of at least the 0.76 is possibly confine people to unusable, dinky little balconies that don't serve them in taller buildings. And I don't think the projection as the building goes up, really harms the public realm at all, but rather improves the conditions for those living in these multifamily developments. So, I would be happy to discuss this at a future meeting, but I actually think it should pass as part of this bylaw to ensure that proposals coming forward between now and a subsequent review actually allow for better balconies and better usable living space for people in taller buildings. Councillor Anderson.
Yes, I will also not be supporting the proposed amendment, and I cannot really add to Mayor Elliott's comments. I agree with her points wholeheartedly. I think that this should be going in at the present time, and it may affect a development proposal coming forward in the near future. I think it's important to consider that extra usable outdoor space in multifamily developments. Thank you.
Councillor Reyes.
Thank you. I won't be supporting this. I don't have the same concerns about balconies that I expressed that I do about the setbacks. So for me, I'm prepared to leave this as presented. And if we have a future discussion about it, if it turns out it's not workable, then so be it. But I think for the moment, I'm happy to leave it where it is.
Councillor French.
Just so it doesn't come as any surprise, without adding to what my colleagues have said, I too will not be supporting the amendment.
I'll call the question. Any opposed? Mayor Elliott, Councillor French, Councillor Anderson, Councillor Race opposed. Motion fails. So we're back to the main motion. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Speaking to the main motion, I will support it. I think, although I would have liked to see a deliberation of the balconies with this topic of the rear setbacks, I can appreciate some rationale for it moving forward. And I think for me, it was more about increasing flexibility in terms of whether 0.76 meters is actually sufficient enough, or if we wanted to look at something larger. But that we can always revisit that in a future conversation. I do think that some excellent work has been done here with regards to this fairly extensive amendments to the zoning bylaw that really clean it up and achieve a lot of what we've set out in terms of increasing flexibility, improving functionality, and addressing gaps. And to me, a big piece of doing that is improving our process and increasing efficiency, both for developers, yes, but also for our staff and for council, and as a result for taxpayers. And so I think that there is a risk to moving on a case-by-case consideration of variances. That's not necessarily what I want to see. I just want to see a bit more of a robust discussion with respect to setbacks, because I do hear from the comments this evening, from council questions, that there's some confusion around setbacks versus gross floor area versus lot coverage, and how those things interplay for density and how our neighborhoods are created. So I do think that it is worthwhile pulling out those pieces around the setbacks for multifamily units in order to give us, both as council and as a community, the space to have those discussions in terms of how we envision development happening in the longer term in our neighborhoods. So I will support the motion on the floor. Thank you very much.
Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah, thanks. I will be supporting the motion on the floor. There's a few things I wanted to touch on. I heard a suggestion that density would causes higher taxes, and my understanding is density, lots of pros and cons, but tends to result in less infrastructure per capita, and so it tends to push taxes or help moderate taxes or keep them lower, actually. So I just wanted to clarify that. There's also some comments about this being an issue between, you know, what developers want versus what current residents want, and I think there's an assumption in there, I think, that's biased towards existing homeowners. But when you think about people who aspire to buy a home or people who are renters, there's a whole other population of residents that I've had some conversations and seen some correspondence that have a different perspective and see the value in smaller setbacks. So I know there's a variety of opinions, and I don't think that framing of developers versus current residents is an accurate or fair one. And I think there's some equity pieces tied into this, which are important to consider. We've heard issues about solar exposure, access to green space, livability, privacy, a number of these things. And in the discussion about Wilson Crescent, concern about some of the trees and vegetation came up, which I guess ties into green space. And some of those things maybe need to be covered better in DPA guidelines. And so I'm not actually certain that the suggested setbacks are incorrect, but I think there are a host of issues that we want to try and address and protect, and I think some more discussion and which tools should be used to achieve those objectives is worthwhile. I think it is a bit of a miss on our part that we had some meetings with developers, but not the community. I think in general, the public hearing process and the engagement we've had, I've had lots of great conversations, shows that there has been actually a fair bit of community consultation and engagement, that all kinds of stuff comes through us, and the website the district website is really important to follow because that is where all this stuff comes forward. And I think people should not dismiss that as a critical piece of understanding what's going on. And so maybe it's a bit of a lesson for all of us, but I think on the district side, an opportunity for a bit more community engagement with the developer engagement might have been useful. I just want to touch on another point. It was talked about, people come here for the nature, so on and so forth. And I think there is an important conversation about green space and doing density well. But one of the benefits of some density is it prevents us from sprawling out. And so then it's a quick 15-minute walk from anywhere you are in Squamish to the greater outdoors. And if we start going to bigger and bigger setbacks, we'll inevitably sprawl out more and more quickly, and our access to that real big nature becomes further and further away and accessible to fewer and fewer people. And so these are some of the things I think we need to wrestle about. The final point I wanted to touch on that pains me a little bit is in terms of protecting privacy and all of these things. We're debating, do we make the houses smaller or constrain what the houses can be, or do we make the setbacks smaller? And we're not talking about, well, hey, could we compromise on parking and our car dependence here? With the climate emergency and everything that we're facing, with the complaints about there's too much congestion, so on and so forth, should we really as a community be focused on, hey, could we get rid of some of that car piece? And that would give us, bigger setbacks and get some more of the flexibility you want in the building size. And so I hope maybe that's a piece of the conversation we can touch on when we come back to this. And I've rambled on for a while, but that's enough for now. Thanks.
Councillor French.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm speaking in favor of the main motion. And what's happening tonight is a demonstration of the process working as it should. The bulk of this ominous bylaw is low impact, and I think it should move forward. I've heard loud and clear that many residents have strong feelings about setback reductions, and the community wants a say, and that's as it should be. So I support a consultation process. And I want to acknowledge all those who shared their thoughts in the public hearing tonight. In this pandemic era, it's more challenging than ever to voice opinions in a public hearing. Gathering in person is a concern for those with health issues, or even those who are healthy. And as we heard from two participants tonight, technology challenges are real. So thank you to all those who made an effort to engage this evening. It's appreciated. And it's important to me that those who spoke know they were heard. And those who participated in some other way, whether it be by sending an email message, signing a petition, or taking some other action, you too have been heard, and I appreciate the participation in the process. So I support the main motion on the floor.
Thank you, Councillor French. I will support the motion. I'm sure by now Mr. Daly can recite most of our zoning bylaw by memory after working through all of these housekeeping amendments. So I appreciate your hard work on this file. I'm certainly not interested in looking at setbacks on a case-by-case basis. That will grind us to a halt. And I'm actually supportive of the setbacks that were recommended. But I think there is possibly some nuance in lots where rear setbacks meet side setbacks that we might want to address. But otherwise, a 6-meter setback with another 6-meter setback on the back setback is 12 meters. And that is sufficient. I think the place where we have to look, and we've already designated or directed this work, is updating our development permit area guidelines. And I think there should be added direction around privacy, around light exposure, because you don't have to face buildings right into a neighboring yard. I think that you can angle buildings, you can design windows differently, and we've seen that in other developments to protect privacy of neighboring properties. So to me, that's architectural choices that are made and still allow for reasonable setbacks, which I think staff have proposed here. I think that the pandemic certainly has been hard, but I reject any notion that we are trying to sneak things through during a pandemic We have our website, we have our e-news, we have our development showcase, we have our coming up at council videos. We have council coffee with a counselor, we have mayor's drop-in, we all have phones and email addresses, so do our staff. And any time during the last 2 years that we could hold an in-person open house or public forum, we did. I think that our move to electronic participation, which we have cemented into our procedure bylaw, has actually enabled broader participation. We have had more people attend public hearings because those folks with children or who have mobility issues or may have anxiety issues or have new children at home, like Councillor Stoner, enables participation. It doesn't discourage participation. So this isn't something that we lose even when pandemic restrictions are lifted. It is absolutely something to be celebrated. So sure, we can always do better. We take the feedback on our engagement and we work it into our process. But in no way do we ever try and do things in an underhanded or sneaky way. We have been talking about these bylaw changes since last June, and they have been in our agendas since then. And certainly the public hearing process is absolutely for the community members to speak. So I think what this bylaw does is address the flexibility, functionality, and the gaps that were existing in our bylaw. I'm happy to sit with my colleagues and see if there's some added nuance we can bring to some of the setback issues in multifamily. The trade-off for me is making sure that we don't put in setbacks that then limit the livability of the space that's being built. I think properties can coexist as long as there's good design that's happening. So with that, I will call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Murray, for your moderation this evening. Thank you, Mr. Daly. And thank you to all the citizens that participated this evening. It's a pleasure to have people back in City Hall and participating online. Council will take a 10-minute recess. Come back at 22 the hour. Okay, welcome back to the regular business meeting for Tuesday, February 15th. We are now going back to item 8A1, District of Squamish Building Bylaw. This is an amendment bylaw for some housekeeping amendments, number 2896, 2022. Over to staff.
Thank you. My name is Colin McCarthy. I'm the Acting Chief Building Inspector at the District of Squamish. Here to present to you a proposed building bylaw update that includes implementation of CP program for the District of Squamish, energy options for commercial buildings, as well as multiple housekeeping amendments that we can go over as in depth as you choose. Thank you for having us. At a glance, the Certified Professional Program, which is something we're looking at doing an alternative building permit process for the district. There's been a lot of work gone into that over the last year. It's ready to launch and be adopted. Step code options are needed for commercial space. That's been recognized. It's tough to meet certain targets for various reasons. We've got various amendments from changes in wording to just tidying up and making our bylaw more clear, and then the associated changes within fees and charges and other bylaws, just basically a trickle down because of the changes in the building bylaw. The CP program, for those of you who are not aware, is an alternative building permit process. It's created jointly by the Engineers and Geoscientists of British Columbia and the AIBC. It is a fairly regimented and structured process that will allow the municipality to have, I would explain it as a better contract with the registered professionals who want to deal with the district. It allows us to have more reliance on their certification. And in exchange for that, what we hope is that it evolves into a more streamlined process for the developers that choose to follow that program. For municipalities that have adopted a program like this, we've looked at West Vancouver, Vancouver, Abbotsford, and Surrey. You'll notice Squamish is a small municipality for taking this on, but we feel like it's a good time to be involved in it with the rate of development here. And we feel pretty supported. We've been in communication with the EGBC and the IIBC. We have contacts there who have supported us well in getting this far and will as we implement the program. I am going to turn it over to Jonas, who has been working on the energy requirements for commercial buildings.
Thank you, Colin. So going through the step code implementation, we're at the sort of the maximum implementation phase of it, where most buildings in Squamish have to hit the highest standard that's applicable to those buildings. And it doesn't seem to be a problem for most buildings other than a certain type of commercial space. And where this has popped up is commercial space that's kind of user oriented, that presentation centers, retail spaces where the users want to have larger windows, more sort of open areas inside. So the energy efficiency calculations that get really affected by the sort of the openings in the building, the size of the building, its orientation. And sometimes these things can be quite constrained. On a smaller property, the orientation of the building is very set based on the setbacks. And so we started looking into, okay, what are the options to step 3, which is where commercial space is at now. In order to get a building permit, you have to be able to hit that maximum requirement. So as opposed to, residential buildings where the maximum requirement is either step 4 or 5, commercial space, it can only get to step 3, according to the BC step code. And so we started exploring an option of reducing the steps, so from step 3 down to step 2, as in are still much, or that score in GHGI is much higher than a step 2 building with a fully decarbonized system. And now down below graph is something that the province has produced, showing the different alternatives in energy efficiency combined with the energy sources. And you can see that using electric heating or an electric heat pump really keeps those scores low across the board versus using natural gas, for instance, for heating sources through the steps. So there's quite a bit more variation in emissions rather than the electric option. And so this would be an option for any commercial development as proposed to subscribe to this step. And I think the ultimate goal is to reduce our emissions. And, the evidence suggests that it's certainly possible to do that through this alternative. My expectation would be that quite a few commercial developments would probably subscribe to this program. And that's it. Over to the next slide, Colin.
This brings us to the housekeeping amendments, and as I said, they vary sort of in importance and technicality. I'll run through them quickly. Clarification of the application of our bylaw to plumbing and fire suppression. This is something, questions that came up. The bylaw refers to the BC Building Code. The BC Plumbing Code is Book 2 of the BC Building Code. This isn't obvious to everyone when they look at that bylaw. It does also refer to building and construction in generic terms, so we decided that we would add plumbing systems and fire suppression systems to those generic terms, so it was more clear for the users of the bylaw. We've made reference to a clearer reference to site safety. We didn't realize this when during the last amendment that the reference to site safety, and that includes the fines for failing to ensure a safe site, was made reference only to demolition sites. We really feel this needs to be clarified. We're fine with the rate of development right now Our staff is spending a lot of time responding to concerns of the public for what's going on adjacent to public way, as well as for our staff that need to go on site to assess sites. The requirement for hazardous materials assessment for demolitions, we were asking for that. It wasn't in the bylaw. We've added that. We have an allowance, much like the Whistler bylaw, for small alterations to a fire suppression system, not to require a registered professional or engineer. We've clarified that in the bylaw. We've clarified that a DP application must be accepted before we can accept a BP application. Previously, there was, I think it was a typo that it said that it needed to be approved, and we realized that we weren't able to enforce that. We changed some of the language around applications expiring. It simply wasn't clear. Approval of a building permit versus issuance. Our bylaws are based on issuance date, when things expire. It was always a sort of a question that people maybe had different answers to, whether when the building inspector has approved your permit and it's ready to pick up, has it been issued? Or has it been issued when you come in and pay for your permit and take your permit away and ready to start your job? So we've made that clear. We've added perhaps an enforcement piece regarding outstanding fees or charges payable to the district, that a permit may be withheld or revoked. This could have to do with damages to district property or other outstanding fees payable. Permit extension is one that has been problematic. Previously, there was kind of a hard stop at when a permit would expire, and there was an opportunity for a one-time permit extension. We have seen projects that were in danger of becoming expired, and we did wonder what we would do if a permit expired on a 4 or 5 story building that was 3/4 of the way complete, and they would need to apply perhaps under a new building code or different bylaws. How would we deal with that? So we have proposed an amendment that would allow for various stages of renewal with fees attached to that. Sanitary facilities, one thing that comes up, especially if you're next to a subdivision or a project where workers don't have the appropriate facilities, people go where they go. We've made it very clear what's expected on a permitted site, that they provide facilities for the workers on site, and that those facilities need to be available and they need to not impact district property. Made a clarification on swimming pools. Swimming pools require a permit. Do the ones off the shelf from Canadian Tire at various depths that you put up for the summer require a permit. We've changed the language to refer to pools intended for temporary use, to be put up and taken down seasonally would not require a building permit. We've clarified with regard to offenses and prohibitions that each calendar day that the prohibition exists would be deemed a separate offense and punishable as such. And in the area of speaking to swimming pools, we have excluded hot tubs from required permits. There are some other things around hot tubs and pools, including fencing, that are still a requirement of the bylaw, but you wouldn't need a permit to install a hot tub. As I mentioned, this would lead to some trickle-down amendments in our fees and charges bylaw, as well as a couple of others. Fees and charges, we've included those fees that I mentioned for permit extensions. And the other one, we've combined our fees for record search, records for building information. We had a fee that we were charging to take on the search, and an additional fee when we provided the records, depending on how much was there. It was a minimum of $25. What we've done since in the last few years, we've digitized a huge amount of records, or we've stored them off-site with a really good system for recording what we do have. And our staff at the counter now can let someone know within a few seconds sort of what kind of records we have available. So there's no need to sort of say, pay us some money now and we'll see what we find. We can let them know right away. So we're charging the $50 upfront for the retrieval and the provision of those records. The MTI bylaw, which is what is that? The MTI, it's a bylaw that's seldom used. I can't remember off the top of my head what is it, Robin? Municipal ticket information. It's rarely used anymore since we've gone to the notice enforcement bylaw, but has not been repealed. The fines still live there. We're still able to use it. We haven't used it as much. And what we've made, the change we made there is, as I mentioned, the site safety. We've changed what that fine applies to. It's applied now to the new sentence regarding site safety and not just to demolition permits. And we've made the same change in the notice enforcement bylaw. And that essentially is the meat and potatoes of our amendments. And following any questions and discussion, we would like to recommend that the District of Squamish Building Bylaw 1822-2004 Amendment Bylaw be given first 3 readings. That the District of Squamish Fees and Charges Bylaw Amendment be given first 3 readings. That the District of Squamish Municipal Ticket Information Bylaw Amendment be given first 3 readings. And that the District of Squamish Notice Enforcement Bylaw Amendment be given first 3 readings. And at that time, we're happy to engage in discussion and answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy and Mr. Valniskis. I just want to check with Legislative Services staff. We just got a printed copy of the bylaw, and I'm curious why.
I can speak to that, Mayor. So there was a typo in the bylaw in the package, and thank you to one of the councillors who identified it. We thought we fixed the mistake, but it showed up still in this package. So it's just been updated. There was just a typo in it.
Was this emailed to Councillor Stoner?
I don't believe so.
Okay, and which section was amended?
It was section 15. So there was a duplicate essentially of section 15 amendment, and it's been removed in the building bylaw. That's right, the amendment bylaw for the building bylaw.
All right. Did you catch that, Councillor Stoner? Okay. Council, do you have questions for staff? Councillor French.
Thank you, Mayor. So this bylaw makes reference to permits being picked up. And for me, this wording seems like legacy language. Should we be using more future-proof language that allows for online digital payment and permit delivery by digital means? So wondering if I can get some thoughts from staff on that.
This is something that we discuss and are working to continually. The first question that comes to mind, or the first thought that comes to mind, is the steps that we've taken recently within the last year with implementing our new software systems. I could say that I think it was less than a year and a half ago that we were even able in our department to take credit card payments. In the last year, we've taken on a really amazing state-of-the-art system that is allowing us to track things and for staff to monitor files in real time at the same time as one another from multiple locations within the same file. We're taking steps in that direction. I can't speak to what it would take to do that because I'm not the IT person, but I can say that we understand that that's somewhere that we would like to go. I would love for people to be able to see their files, to be able to have an operating checklist that people can see online through a portal. We're not there yet, but we're talking about it all the time.
Okay, very good. And in the Certified Professional Program Supplementary Manual and Inserts in section 2.4, correct civic address, we have the wording, prior to making a building permit application, the CP should confirm that the correct civic address of the project is used. And then in 2.12, electrical, elevator, and gas trade permit, it reads the CP should confirm with the CRP and the RPRs that any safety authority of British Columbia requirements for electrical, gas, and elevator permits have been addressed. So in these two sections, I want to be certain that the use of the word should is appropriate and maybe it's strategic. So is should being strategically used in these examples, or are we better off using the word will instead of should to strengthen it?
Okay, a couple of things. One thing, the majority of the work that was done on our supplementary manual was done with a building official who is with us no longer, Jagdish Narayana. He wrote this, and then it needed to be approved by the CP manager, and I believe a committee formed with members of the AIBC as well as the EGBC. And it is very specific that it would not contradict the provincial manual, which I don't know that was provided in your package. It is something. It's not something that we have the ability to change. We only have the ability to change this. And while I want to take a note of what you said, the supplementary manual that we've drawn up, we have the ability to change at any time. We have to submit it, and as long as it does not contradict, we can make other changes. There was another change actually suggested today. What we do have to be careful of when we're working in the arena of architects and engineers is that the process that we are relying on them to follow, that they are left to follow that process. Questions can be asked that may, part of what I do is I ask pointed questions of registered professionals. If I know that this is what it says here and I find an issue with that, I ask our certified professional, well, it says here that you should be doing this. Can you explain to me why you haven't done that? And they need to provide me with that answer. We need to, in these cases, the language in the letters of assurance that accompany this kind of stuff is pretty specific. Architects and engineers have bylaws, code of ethics, et cetera, that they need to follow. So I can't answer your question right now whether we can make that change because it may contradict, because they need to be allowed to follow their process. If we start dictating to an architect or an engineer what their process should be, rather than ask them questions about why they did it, we may find ourselves sitting side by side with them, facing the same liabilities that we're asking them to take on.
Thanks, Mayor.
Councillor Anderson, did I see your hand?
Yes, Mayor Elliott, but in fact, the theme I'd like to focus on is one that's already been addressed by Councillor Stoner in a correspondence to staff, so I would give her the first opportunity. Otherwise, I'm ready to
pass in the buck. Did I see your hand, Councillor Stoner? Yes, and then I'll go to Councillor Pettingill.
Thank you through the chair, and thank you, Councillor Anderson. I did have a few questions. The first was, I'm curious about in the section under demolition, so I think that starts at 7.6, if there's any reason why we don't add a reference to the demolition waste diversion bylaw. So I read through that and I wouldn't have actually recognized that we had a demolition waste diversion bylaw. Is it just up to the applicant to know that there's a subsequent bylaw that they need to adhere to as well?
Through the mayor, getting my protocols aligned again. It's been a while since I've been here. And I want to thank you, Councillor Stoner, for giving me an opportunity today to prepare for that question. We try to keep the bylaws working independently. The bylaws exist and they have different ways of enforcement. The building officials, we enforce the building bylaw. And it is, I believe, the bylaw enforcement and sustainability coordinators that can enforce the solid waste bylaw. And a reference to another bylaw within this bylaw, my feeling, and we've discussed this other times with making reference to things, one bylaw into another bylaw, is it can put things, it makes it harder to separate which bylaw we're talking about at the time that they're not in compliance with. If someone's not in compliance with the solid waste bylaw and it was mentioned in the building bylaw, are they not in compliance with that clause in the building bylaw that mentioned it as well as the solid waste bylaw? This can get a little bit tricky, and then who's enforcing it? I think it's important that we know what's required as bylaw enforcement, and we do enforce them. For me personally, in working with bylaw enforcement, I find that them being separate issues is more practical for doing that work.
And if I could just add to that, for Councillor Stoner, for you, Mayor. So we do have a general provision in the bylaw that essentially says the building inspector can withhold issuing a permit if there's a non-compliance with another bylaw. And in this case, the solid, the diversion bylaw really doesn't deal with the site, which is what the building bylaw is all about. It's all about the project, and that side, it deals with where the waste is going. So that's just another reason to have some separation between the two. Every demolition project now goes through the solid waste department. So, there's a very little chance that we're going to miss one.
That's helpful. Thank you. I have another question around section 10.9, which sets out specific timelines of which a complete application shall expire or be terminated after 90 days. And I appreciate the ambition and the clarity that this provides, but I'm just curious what our current turnaround times are for building permit applications. Our website currently says that we're reviewing applications from October. And so I just want to make sure that we're not setting an alternative standard for what it is that we're able to turn around versus what we're expecting applicants to be able to turn around.
Through the mayor, Councillor Stoner again, based on that inquiry earlier today, I did bring up some records and realize a couple of things. I believe that October date does require some updating. Where we are right now with our standard queue of permits, which would be large renovations, single family homes, additions, duplexes, not your commercial institutional type of permits, but your standard queue, we're operating at approximately a 10-week turnaround, which is a big jump from where we were in the middle of last year at around 16 weeks. We did a quick call around today, actually. I asked one of the building officials to do a quick call around and see where other municipalities are at. And anyone close to us, mind you, larger cities, District North Vancouver, City of North Vancouver, District of West Vancouver, and Whistler are all operating at around 16 weeks. I can tell you, I'm just going to stick on this topic just for one quick second about timelines. I've been doing this here now for just about 10 years. And trying to maintain a consistent response to how long it takes a building permit to be issued is one of the most difficult things I've had to do. It depends on the submission. It depends on what's going on in the community as far as developments in general, how we're looking at larger projects as well. It depends on staffing, and it depends on pandemics. Back to your question about the 90 days. That 90 days that you're referring to, it says something to the nature that a permit will expire 90 days after a building official has requested supplementary information, and that information is not provided. And there is also an allowance within that clause, I believe, for that to be waived by the building official. We are in no way trying to create a hard and fast line that is difficult to meet. And if someone needs, for instance, we may have someone who's waiting for an approval from BC Hydro because they need to do something that's within a right of way. If they can't provide us that information, we're certainly not going to expire that permit. However, we do on occasion have permits submitted where maybe the idea of carrying on with this project was not all that serious anyway. Maybe the property's for sale at the same time. They're not really sure what they're going to do, and that's the intent of that clause around the 90 days. It's certainly not to suggest that, hey, we're doing our job and we're getting our job done, and so you get yours done. It's meant we're always going to interact with customers in that way, but it's to give us an allowance to weed out those ones that just seem to sit around forever. I hope that answers your question.
That's helpful. Thank you, Mr. McCarthy.
Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to make sure I understand the CP program properly. So if one of our certified professionals grants a building permit, building gets built, and then we find one way or another some things aren't compliant with our regulations, I take it the obligation is still on the building owner to correct those, and there's no way that we are at fault at that. Is that correct?
Councillor Pettengill, through the mayor, it's really the permit process is really no different, and the authority we have is really no different. We have the same authorities that we have always had, but what we are offering is, provided that they document their submission and make certain commitments within that documentation that has been created by their two governing bodies, we allow them to take that on with less oversight in some cases, or in many cases, than some of these other projects. We have seen projects that have gone on almost like this in Squamish so far. This formalizes that. It's going to streamline applications and possibly developments, but it's also in some ways going to free up staff time to allow us to spend more resources on the projects that are not overseen by a CP. We've been working with allotting our resources to this pace of development has been moving pieces for quite some time, and we're hopeful that this is really going to allow us to allocate resources where they're most necessary.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I guess what I'm just wanting to be assured of, I guess, is that at the end of the day, if one way or another we end up with a building that's somehow not compliant with some of our regulations, the building owner is still required to bring it into compliance.
Yes. Yeah. Our building bylaw is applicable, and the building code is as applicable as it ever was. It's just a separate process where we have a little more assurance from the architects and engineers of record. Well, basically by the one. You'll often have a coordinating registered professional who, when you have more than a couple of engineers or architects on a project, one needs to be the coordinator. That's standard on any project, and this takes it one step higher, that if a certified professional under this program provides us with the documentation, and the documentation is in the package, and you can see the sort of commitments that they make. We have faith. I don't know if more faith is the right word, but our authority and what happens in those cases is no different than what happens right now. If one of the projects that has gone on and we come across something, it is virtually no different. What is different is how the project got to that place, but how we would deal with that is no different.
Okay, thanks. And then just related to that, is there a process planned, and I didn't catch anything, but where like once a year, once every 2 years, we sort of audit, go in sort of after the fact and look more closely at how the building ended up. So there's some sort of audit process.
Yep. Monthly, there's within the documentation, monthly there to provide us progress reports. And our intention is that our staff will be going monthly throughout to collect those progress reports and gather an understanding of where they're at, what they're doing, have a look, see if we have any questions, any of those pointed questions that we want to ask of the certified professional that maybe he passes on to his engineers. What's going on here?
Okay, and I guess, sorry to belabor the point, but would we, and do we reserve the right to go in and sort of, one building in the program a year or something, go in and actually look hands-on at the end product and inspect that?
Absolutely. We have our building bylaw says that a building official can walk on a site at any time. If there's an open building permit, a building official can walk onto a site at any time and look at anything we want. And a developer or a trade, no one can. We've also got in our building bylaw a clause refusing access to a building official is a violation. The permit can be revoked or a stop work order. There's significant authority within the building bylaw itself, and none of that is changing.
Okay, thank you. And
Mr. Velniskis, did you want to add something there?
Yes, thank you. So those are really good questions. And I believe our plan is to do auditing, especially at the beginning of the process. Like, the CPs get certified by AIBC and EGBC, and then they work in a jurisdiction, throughout BC, in multiple jurisdictions. But those jurisdictions, can decide if there's a certified professional that has repeatedly, have made errors, have produced poor drawings, or something has, as a result of CP work, has impacted the development. And so we would be certainly, especially at the beginning of the process, looking at, the quality that's showing up in these developments. And over time, perhaps either increasing our involvement in these permits or decreasing them based on what we're seeing on the ground.
Councillor Herford?
Thank you. The buildings records research, I'm just looking at the track changes document provided here. And sorry, in the presentation, you outlined why we're making the change, because we know if we're going to have the document or not. But that happened quickly. I'm just thinking from a cost recovery standpoint, if it's still appropriate to charge that combined, what admits to, or what adds up to a combined rate rather than reducing the rate because the time associated with, or I'm just curious the sort of the cost recovery status of that.
Jonas may be able to add to this. As I recall, my experience with this, if a couple of the clerks in our office that know way more than I do were here, they could probably answer this better. But I believe that these are perhaps fixed costs, administrative fees that we need to charge that are within the fees and charges bylaw for photocopies or for a records search. I may not be entirely accurate with that, but I believe that may be where they came from. I could find you an answer, but I don't have that answer now. Do you?
No, that's okay. Just in the same.
Jonas may have something to add.
The only thing I would add, through Mayor, is that in some cases it's going to be more, and in some cases will be less. But that's the fee, essentially. That it captures, the average.
Okay, no, that's fine. And then in the documents provided, table 3.2 additional charges, which is where the track changes for this records piece. There's a paragraph below that looks like it needs to be eliminated. The building records research request will be charged $25 initial request and an additional $25 at the time. There's a paragraph in there that looks like it should just be stricken from this to align with the changes made in the table above.
What's the number of the clause?
It's not numbered. It's page 154 of 317 in our agenda, and this page isn't numbered, but it's directly at the bottom of 3.2 additional charges.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. That is a leftover. We just changed the fee table.
Yeah, so that paragraph below. Okay, thank you. That aligns things. I was confused with reading that as well. So, thank you.
I just have a quick question. So the CP program improves our efficiency, and I think it's a bit of a learning curve, right? So I think what I heard you say, Mr. McCarthy, is it evolves into a more streamlined process. So Is that correct?
Thanks, Mayor. This is entirely new, and one thing that we've discovered in researching through talking with other municipalities, like building departments and like municipalities, they're all very different in the way that these things are managed. And it wasn't entirely consistent when we spoke with other municipalities about how they are managing the program. We spoke with one municipality very close to us that in 2 years haven't had one application to the CP program. So I guess perhaps I'm being somewhat cautious in trying to explain how I understand this will work, because all we know is that this is becoming more common. I know that there is a request for this from the development community. We hear from more people every year. And I think it's going to allow us to put resources in trying to look after our community, which is what the building officials want to be doing. These architects and engineers, I believe it's going to be a very few that would be doing the sort of work that we're all afraid of. I expect this to be most of the time a successful path that we're going to go down, but we're gonna go about it. We have the option within the bylaw. It says that we may accept applications under an alternative process, and we intend to look at it that way. We're going to move down it. We're going to accept some. We're going to meet these people. Most of the communities have a list of approved CPs, because there are some who get their certification and then they don't perform and they don't make it. And there is a list within the bylaw amendments that say when we can revoke that permit or post a stop work and say this isn't working.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yep. Mr. Vilniskis, we've been through rezonings eliminating fossil fuel use as much as possible. So with these amendments, will we see more of those commercial spaces come forward as step 2, do you think? Or the building permit process comes after rezoning. And so I'm trying to figure out how this blends with what council's been trying to achieve on the rezoning side to eliminate fossil fuels.
Thank you. Yes, I think that it will, in some cases, a developer may commit to building to a certain step through the rezoning process, and then to use a certain type of energy, in which case they might eliminate for themselves that option. But this will capture more than just rezonings. It will capture, development permits, things that are going through. And I think at the end of the day, if we're looking to limit our emissions, as I showed in that graph, the difference between being at step 3 and step 2 and using green energy is very little. So I think it's an option that should be available to everybody, to all commercial developments.
All right, thank you. And then one thing I spotted in section 7.1 is this is application for a permit under part 7. E says, so every owner must apply for and obtain a permit prior to, and E is installing or modifying a fire alarm system or sprinkler system. And then we added G, installing or altering a plumbing system or fire suppression system. So do we need to refer to sprinkler system in E, or can we strike it there and leave the fire suppression system in G to be consistent in our language?
We could certainly strike it. It only needs to be in one location. It was used differently throughout the document, and I think I just doubled up there.
Yeah, no problem. It's a big document.
The only thing I will say, sorry, Colin, is the sprinklers. Any mention in this bylaw about sprinklers is very sensitive, because it's been something that's been sort of taken away from the province in terms, what the building code says about sprinklers is all that the bylaw can do. And it wasn't always the case. So we've been told to be very sensitive about removing any references to sprinklers from the bylaw for that reason, because everything that's in the bylaw now is apparently still good. And it goes beyond the code in some cases. So I just would caution maybe if we're going to do that, we should, we want to take a closer look to what we're doing.
So the two terms are not similar enough in the eyes of,
I'd just like to speak to that a little bit. What Jonas is referring to is when the Building Act came into effect. And we're limited now in what we can ask for that goes beyond the building code. And that clause that existed prior to us requesting this amendment, while the terminology and while it is doubled up, I know exactly where Jonas is, what he is getting at is if by changing this bylaw, we are going to avoid something that was enforceable before. And at the same time, what I would like to say is that I don't know what the correct terminology is for a sprinkler system. A fire suppression system, I think, is the technical term. The fire suppression system is throughout the code. The sprinkler system is within this bylaw, and this was a draft bylaw that we modified before our last amendment. And I think the fire suppression system is probably more accurate, but maybe we don't want to remove the sprinkler system unless we have to.
fair enough, fair enough. Any other questions, council? Now that it's 9:25, Councilor Bengill?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to pick up on the mayor's questions about eliminating fossil fuels. And I saw in the chart, there was one where you had a 97% reduction GHGs by going no gas, step 2, versus an 84% reduction. The second column, that was the 97% reduction. That was just heating, I think. And then the other one was total. I just want to understand that a bit because I looked back when we implemented this for the residential carbon bonus program. And the understanding was that 1.0 GHG tons per year, whatever it is, was practically going to preclude not just heating, but cooking and ornamental and so on and so forth. And so that's been my understanding and hope, and I think that's what we need to do because of the emergency. But when I saw those two columns there, and the one's just an 84% reduction, I'm not sure what we're talking about then expecting. And so my hope is that the way this is written and that 1.0 threshold, practically speaking, you're no gas and we could see no gas covenants. Or is there something more in there, greater sources of emissions I'm missing somehow?
Thank you. Colin, maybe we could put up, would it be too tricky to get back into the presentation? But essentially, you're right. The only difference is that we were previously, when we looked at GHGIs, we really focused on emissions and building systems that are residential. So there's lots of hot water heating going into an apartment building, which essentially would make it impossible to get to that 1.0 without electrifying that portion. But what the intention of the bylaw here is to look at the total energy system for the building, so that 1.0 would include, hot water heating. Not sure about cooking, but I think that it's starting at that point would start to get really difficult to enforce after the building is built. The tenant moves in, and if they upgrade their cooking facilities, well, one, they might be a use that no longer triggers the step code. There's a number of uses that are excluded in a commercial setting. But to answer your question, the intent is to look at to use the same approach we did with the zoning bylaw. So we're using the same language where we're looking at all the primary energy systems in the building. So that would include hot water heating and space heating and lights, things like that. I don't know if that would include cooking, but again, it's a little different because we're dealing with a commercial setting versus a residential.
So I guess maybe then if I can ask staff to come back with a clarification on that at some point, because my understanding was that 1.0 threshold meant practically speaking, it precluded cooking, ornamental, like gas. And if it doesn't do that, maybe we need to consider no gas covenants. in the residential and here and so on, because I think, you know, it's the infrastructure as well as the emissions, because the infrastructure means future emissions. So I guess I'll leave that question for staff, maybe for a future clarification. But that is my hope, that we're not just building in long-term emissions.
Absolutely. And, you know, we've been trying to take a progressive approach where we're kind of turning up the dial quite frequently over the last few years. So I think, you know, these are sort of this is our initial step into providing options for step code, reducing it, and looking at the primary energy systems. And, you know, I fully expect that, you know, our next step might include looking at cooking facilities as well.
All right. Not seeing any other hands. The staff recommendation is 3 readings. Someone like to move that? Moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Councillor French. If we're going to speak to it, let's keep it snappy. Councillor Anderson.
I appreciate staff's comments on the issue raised by Councillor Stoner with respect to building demolition waste, that we have 2 pieces working in concert, and we should be continuing to strive for that as often as we can, because we have big challenges in that field. Secondly, a general observation on the step code options for commercial space. I think we need to look at the bigger picture, keep the bigger picture in mind as well. The bigger picture, that is, of green building goals. Green building, and I'll just use that loosely, is 3 things. Operational energy efficiency, which is what we've been discussing here in practical terms for this bylaw. Embodied carbon, which is a project currently we have with the Whistler and other agencies that Dr. Pickett's is heading up, which may or may not come back to us again for the building bylaw in the future, I don't know. And thirdly, building resiliency. And this includes designing for deconstruction, designing for alternate uses over time. And especially as we speak about commercial buildings, in the latter 2 categories, we've got a long way to go. There's a lot of buildings going up, newer buildings that are not especially scoring high points with respect to embodied carbon, and they're not scoring high points with respect to future usability for different uses in future. And this is something we should keep in forefront when we consider commercial building space, especially when we have so many constraints for business in Squamish. So these are just opportunities that we should also be looking at, and not be too narrowly focused on the operational energy picture, which the STEP code steers us to. But the STEP code evolved prior to this evolving discussion of embodied carbon in particular. So let's keep that bigger picture and look at the opportunities in our commercial buildings and the tools we have to apply to these other green building objectives. That's all I had to say. Thank you very much for the package and presentation.
Councillor French.
Thank you, Mayor. It will be snappy. Speaking in favor of the motion, the certified professional program is an important step forward. Also important is the construction of energy efficient buildings in our community. I'd like to thank staff for the good work and the hard work on this project. I support the motion.
Councillor Stoner.
I too support the motion on the floor. Thank you so much to staff for doing the work. Similar to the zoning bylaw amendments, this brings clarity and increases, I think, the efficiency of our staff and clarity for those who are for applicants. I'm excited to see the certified professional program come forward. It's something that we've talked about for a long time, although there is some questions about how frequently it might be used. I do think it provides an important alternative for especially some of the larger developers, and frees up some capacity within our staff, hopefully, in the longer term. We may be one of the smaller municipalities that is looking to adopt it, but I don't think that is a bad thing. I think it'll be interesting for us to be leading in that space. So excited to see how it is adopted. Thanks so much.
Any others? Thank you, Mr. McCarthy. This is a great report. We were talking about the CP program last term. So I know how much work went into getting it here. It'll be interesting to see what the take-up is, but I think it is an important part of our building portfolio. So appreciate the effort there. I think the bylaw reads more clearly with the amendments made. And interested to see how the commercial spaces come to us now. The goal is to reduce GHGs. So if we can do that by making amendments here, as well as the work we do in zoning applications, that's a good thing. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks very much. Yeah, I was going to do that next. Yep. So next up is District of Squamish Fees and Charges Bylaw. This is Amendment Bylaw number 2897, 2022, be given first three readings as amended with striking 3 point. Oh.
It's just below the table. There's a paragraph there. There's like a sentence and a space and a paragraph. That paragraph can.
Could I suggest the amendment by just removing any language outside of the fees table in 3.2 that refers to building records research?
That's what I said. Did you catch that? Thanks, Mr. Valens. Would someone like to move that? Moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any comments? Call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Municipal Ticket Information Bylaw, the Building MTI Update Amendment Bylaw number 2898, 2022, be given first three readings. Moved by Councillor Race, seconded by Councillor French. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. And finally, the Notice Enforcement Bylaw Amendment number 2899, 2022, be given first three readings. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Herford. Call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. We did third reading of the amendment bylaw for the zoning bylaw. So we're on to adoption. So District of Squamish Single-Use Items Reduction Bylaw number 2881, 2022 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Herford. Any comments? Any opposed? Motion carries. Related to that, the amendment to the municipal ticket information for single-use items. This is Amendment Bylaw number 2882, 2022 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Race, seconded by Councillor French. Any comments? Any opposed? Motion carries. District of Squamish Notice Enforcement Amendment Bylaw number 2883, 2022 related to single-use items be adopted. I'll move that. Seconded by Councillor Pettengill. Any comments? Any opposed? Motion carries. We have some capital works loans to approve that the District of Squamish New Fire Hall 2 Capital Works Loan Authorization Bylaw number 2846 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Ray, seconded by Councillor French. Any comments? Any opposed? Motion carries. The District of Squamish Pioneer Way Extension R4 Capital Works Loan Authorization Bylaw number 2847, 2021 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any opposed? Motion carries. The District of Squamish Honeck Park Sea Dike Upgrade Capital Works Loan Authorization Bylaw number 2848, 2021 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Pettengill, seconded by Councillor Race. Any opposed? Motion carries. District of Squamish Fire Fleet Replacement Pumper Truck Loan Authorization Bylaw number 2849, 2021 be adopted. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any opposed? Motion carries. District of Squamish Technology Transformation Project Capital Works Loan Authorization Bylaw number 2850, 2021 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Herford. I'll second that. Any opposed? Motion carries. We don't have any items under staff reports. We do have a consent agenda. So if there's anything in which you find yourself in conflict with in the consent agenda or anything that you would like to pull, please do that now. Councillor Pettengill. Yeah, sorry, they're not on the printed agenda, which is what I'm following. Just strange. Because yeah, I've got it here now. It's not on my printed one. I got a judge. What can I say? 9A1, bylaw enforcement officer appointment, that council appoint Frank Rawlings as the District of Squamish bylaw enforcement officer. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any opposed? Motion carries. And that under council member participation in a biomass sprint exercise, that council pass a motion authorizing Councillor someone and Councillor Anderson to participate in the biomass sprint by accompanying the group on a tour of the forestry site in Squamish. This conflicts with the SLRD board meeting, which I do not want to miss and couldn't be changed. Mr. Pickett's is here if anyone has any questions. Councillor Pettengill.
Well, just if you said, if you're looking for a counselor, another counselor, I would like to go either officially or unofficially. It sounds really interesting.
You have to go officially. Councillor Pettengill's put his name forward. Councillor Race?
Yeah, I'll move we send Councillor Pettengill and Councillor Anderson.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Herford. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Now we're on the consent agenda. My comments from earlier apply. Is there anything anyone wishes to pull or is in conflict with? Nope. You can if you want, Councillor Pettengill. You're good? Okay. Someone move the consent agenda. Thank you, Councillor Race. I'll second that. Any opposed? Motion carries. Now I'm nervous that my printed agenda is not correct. Okay, so no late agenda items. Under correspondence action requested, the correspondence from C. Wilson be forwarded to the Director of Community Services for response. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Herford. Any opposed? Motion carries. The call for nominations for LMLGA for council consideration. Councillor Race?
Move receipt.
I'll second that. And also, you can turn your mic off. If anyone's interested, both Councillor Stoner and I have served on the board and happy to discuss. So it's always, I currently sit as the SLRD rep on the LMHG board. All right, any opposed? Motion carries. And the correspondence from B. Kennery be forwarded to the CFO for a response. Moved by Councillor Race, seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any opposed? Motion carries. Is that all of them? Okay. We don't have anything under items 13, 14. Anything business arising from the minutes? All right. Seeing none, we do not have any committee minutes and reports. Nothing under council staff in-camera announcements. We had no unscheduled public attendance. Any open question period? Anyone online? All right. Council or staff announcements. Councilor French. and then Councillor Pangale.
Thank you, Mayor. And just quickly, Squamish has one resident that I know of competing at the Winter Olympic Games in Beijing, Cassie Sharp, freestyle half pipe skier. And just wanted to acknowledge Miss Sharp and her participation in the big sporting event. Wish her all the best in Beijing.
Councillor Pangale.
Yes, thank you. Just wanted to acknowledge a few Sea to Sky corridor groups holded a series of 4 sessions, building inclusive communities. The mayor was on one of the panels, and it was just some fantastic discussions about making Squamish inclusive and what it feels like for people who are new here. And it's just such a really valuable set of sessions. So I wanted to thank everyone who participated. It was great participation throughout, and yeah, a great series. I'm sorry that we had to miss one due to a council meeting, but the 3 I attended were fantastic. I wanted to I saw that Connor Lum Quartet is performing. It's a House on Performing Arts presentation on February 26th. Connor's a young man who's been kind of the bedrock of the Ampton the Park, and he's been doing the sound and is really excellent, and he's an incredible musician. He's taking music at CapU now, so he's coming up to perform, and anyone who likes music, it'd be well worth attending. And just can't find the email at the moment, but Director Rainbow from the SLRD let me know that kids from Mamquam, the Waldorf School, and Brackendale School, they're in the gallery across from the library. Why is the name escaping me? The Artisan Gallery. So I had a look today. I believe the art is up all month, and there's just fantastic art that all the kids have done. So highly encourage anyone who gets a chance to go out and have a look at it. It's well worthwhile.
Thank you. I just want to check in with on the tech side. Did we miss anything? Okay. Sorry, folks. We're good. Okay, we're good. Thank you. I just want to thank the Rotary Club for inviting me to speak at their meeting last week. It was a chance to provide an update, talk with Rotary about community resiliency and community building. And I really appreciated their questions and the opportunity to update them. Okay, I think we're good.
I have one quick thing.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Thanks. I just wanted to highlight that the Library Under One Roof and the Sea to Sky Action team is hosting a virtual screening of a movie called The Wisdom of Trauma over the next 2 days, along with a community discussion hosted online on Thursday evening about the film. So if anybody's interested in joining that, they can sign up online through the Squamish Public Library.
Thank you. Motion to terminate. Moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you to the public. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, staff, for being here tonight.